Part 3 of Hot Momosa, Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 4. Written by Kathryn M. Hearst. Narrated by Ava Lucas and Aaron Shedlock.
Chapter 24. Leo. "Where's your mom?" I wiped tears from Gunner's chubby cheeks. He stared at Gabe as if trying to figure out how he had an uncle, or maybe he wondered what the heck an uncle was. Whichever the case, the toddler clung to me like he had the night the stalker had broken in his bedroom window. "Mama's in the bathroom." Gunner pointed down the hall. "With the bad man." My blood froze. "Gabe, take him." My brother slid the toddler from my arms without a word. I had no doubt in my mind he'd protect my son as if he were his own. I went into the kitchen, took my gun from the hidden safe, and slipped it under my shirt so Gunner couldn't see it. Meeting Gabe's gaze, I whispered, "Get him out of here." "I'm not leaving. We'll be outside the front door." Good enough. I waited until he disappeared, clicked the safety off, and made my way down the hall. Dahlia came out of the bathroom wide-eyed and pale. She glanced from my face to the firearm and gasped. "It's all right. I'm okay." I'm not proud, but my first thought was she had Harrison Merriweather in my house. My second thought was that I was a complete idiot. Lowering the gun, I said, "Who's in there?" She winced. "Maybe put that thing away before we talk." Okay, maybe I'm not as much of an idiot as I thought. "Answer me." She jolted at the sharp tone in my voice, but recovered quickly. Narrowing her eyes, she stared until I gave in and headed back to the kitchen. "Where's Gunner?" "I had Gabe take him outside when I thought the stalker had you captive in the bathroom." "I need to check on him." She took a step toward the front door, but I grabbed her arm. "He's fine." Dahlia stared at the Glock. "I didn't know you still had weapons in the house." Is she that freaked out, or is she avoiding telling me who's in the bathroom? Two, both in safes. One in the bedroom and one in the kitchen, as always. Her frown deepened. "I don't like it. Gunner could—" "I'll get rid of them as soon as we put a stop to the stalker." I clicked the safety back on and slid the gun back into the safe. "Now tell me who's back there." "Artie Guzman." Dahlia stood at the end of the hall with her arms folded, as if guarding the back of the condo, or, more likely, guarding the would-be poodle napper. What the fuck? That was the last name I'd expected to hear. "He stopped by to talk to you about the dogs." Her shoulders relaxed a little more with each word. "Stuart and I had a miscommunication this morning, and we forgot to set the alarm or lock the door." "You two left the condo wide open?" I held up my hands. "That's unacceptable." "It was chaotic this morning. Gunner was having a tantrum, the dogs didn't want to go in their crates. I was a complete basket case. I got a package from the stalker." Not only had her shoulders tensed again, her voice quivered as if she might lose it. I am definitely an idiot. Drawing her into an embrace, I nuzzled against her cheek and whispered, "I'm sorry. I'm not blaming you. Shit happens." She nodded. I pulled back enough to meet her gaze. "Artie let himself in?" She tensed again. "Yes, but I don't think he meant any harm. He must have gotten spooked when he heard us come home and hid in the shower." Bit by bit, I put together what had happened and didn't like it. Mr. Guzman had some serious explaining to do. "Why is Artie afraid of Gabe?" "It's a long story. A long story I didn't want to get into. Speaking of Gabe, I opened the front door and motioned for him to come back inside. Dahlia took the boy from him, but seemed to avoid looking him in the eye. "Everything okay?" My brother glanced between us. "Artie freaking Guzman is in the bathroom." I couldn't keep the frustration from my voice. Gabe's mouth fell open. "You're kidding." "Nope." He had his reasons for not wanting to see our father's former accountant, and I had mine. Dahlia, on the other hand, had no idea what the hell was going on. She rolled her eyes and walked down the hall, only to return a moment later with Artie. It had been a while since I'd seen the guy, but he hadn't changed a bit. What had changed were my dogs. Normally, they would have been all over me demanding love, but the three poodle tears hung close to their former master with their fuzzy little heads down. They know. They know he's going to take them home, and they want to go. "Surprised to see you in New Orleans. Where are you living these days?" Gabe stepped closer to Artie, who stepped back. "I'd rather not say. I just came for the dogs." The poor guy's voice shook. Not that I blamed him. Coming face to face with the man who had been ordered to oversee your murder would do that to the strongest of men. And Artie Guzman was far from strong. Gunnar lifted his head from Dahlia's shoulder.
Bad man.
I couldn't agree more. Let me get this straight. You break into my house, terrorize my family, and you think I'm going to let you walk out of here with the poodles? Dahlia sighed.
Leo, they're his.
I hated that she was right, but damn it, I didn't want to give them up. They'd seen me through the worst year of my life. Listen to me whine about losing her, missing my son, envying my brothers' lives. I didn't know what I'd do without my furry little therapists. Things are different now. I love my family. He should have his. As much as it killed me, I knew what I had to do. Doll, take Gunnar in the bedroom.
Oh God, no, please.
Artie shuffled backward until his back hit the wall.
Don't hurt me. I'll go. Keep them.
No one's going to hurt you. Did he actually think we'd rough him up with my son within earshot? I waited until Dahlia left the room. The kid's been through a lot lately. I didn't want to upset him. Give me a minute to pack their things. Artie glanced from me to the hallway and back.
He's yours?
He is, and he loves the 3 poodle tears. Artie snorted out a laugh.
Cute nickname.
Yeah. Ignoring the ache in my chest, I grabbed the container of food I'd made for the poodles from the fridge. They eat this better than the dry crap. I'll text you the recipe. Gabe clenched his jaw, but otherwise remained a silent observer.
You love them?
Artie's voice rose an octave. Of course I love them. I patted my thigh, but the dogs remained by Artie's side. He shook his head.
But you're a mobster.
Things have changed, Gabe said. Artie tilted his head.
How is your father?
He's in Sicily, under the care of a hospice team. I put the dog's bowls and toys into another bag.
I wish I could say I was sorry, but he's not a good...
Artie shifted his weight from one foot to the other.
He did order me killed.
Gabe closed his eyes and drew a deep breath. And I've done everything in my power to make things right. Like I said, our situation has changed. Artie glanced between us. He's telling the truth. I motioned to my brother. He runs a bar on Bourbon Street, and I have my hotel and restaurant. We're completely legit. Artie's eyes widened.
Is it safe for me in New Orleans?
Gabe nodded. It's doubtful my father will return to the States. Even if he did, I doubt he'd remember you. Artie winced. I shot my brother a dirty look. No one wanted to hear the man who'd ordered them killed cared so little he wouldn't remember their face. What Gabe means is that our father has a lot on his mind these days. For what it's worth, he's no longer associated with the mob either. Artie seemed to take it all in for a few moments before he nodded.
Maybe we could work out a visitation agreement?
I stopped packing and gave him my full attention.
I'm living in...
He glanced at Gabe and swallowed hard.
I'm in Marigny, walking distance from here.
My brother ran his hand over the back of his neck. All the money I sent you to start a new life, and you came back here? I didn't give 2 shits where he'd been, only that he was close enough to come to some sort of poodle custody agreement. 4 days a week with me, 3 with you? Artie squared his shoulders.
You own a hotel. I assume you work weekends. I'll take them Thursday mornings until Sunday night.
Deal. I blew out a sigh of relief.
And I'll walk them. No more dog walker service for my babies.
You should have quit while you were ahead. I smirked. How long have you been watching me?
Them. I was watching them, in only a couple of weeks.
His voice rose in pitch and in volume.
I swear it.
Gunnar's down for a nap.
Dahlia returned to the kitchen and turned to Artie.
Did I hear you right? You've been keeping an eye on the building?
I have, but it's not what it sounds like.
He gave her a weak smile. Gabe glanced between us. Were you watching the building this morning? Artie gave a slight nod. Dahlia grabbed the man's hand.
What about last night around 8? Or this morning before 6?
He nodded again.
Did you happen to see a large man on our deck last night? He probably jumped over from an adjacent rooftop.
What the hell?
He also came into the building this morning with a manila envelope.
The desperation in her voice undid me. I moved to her side and slid my arm around her.
I saw a man with an envelope follow one of the residents in early this morning. He left empty-handed a few minutes later. I thought it was odd because of the time. It was too early for a courier service. I should know. I put myself through college delivering...
That could be the guy. I cut him off as politely as possible, but his babble and Dahlia's line of questions had me ready to explode. Artie stood a little taller.
Is that who you thought I was? Is he someone dangerous?
Yes, Dahlia and I said in unison. What did he look like? Gabe seated himself on a bar stool.
Tall, broad, dark hair?
Artie shrugged.
I didn't see his face. He was wearing dark glasses. That's why he stuck out to me. That and he looked like a hitman or a bodyguard.
Dark hair? I frowned and handed him the leashes. Not Harrison, then. But who? As if she'd read my mind, Dahlia whispered, Harry could have hired someone. While it was a possibility, everything she told me about the stalker's tactics seemed far too personal to farm out to a hired hand. Artie glanced at his watch.
I hate to cut this short, but I have to go. Mother always has dinner waiting at 5.
Gabe barked out a laugh. I gave you almost $250,000 over the last year and a half, and you're living with your mom? Ignoring the comment, Artie clipped the leads on the dogs and headed to the door.
I'll see you Sunday evening around 6. Don't forget to text me the dog food recipe.
I bent down and gave the poodles goodbye scratches before standing and clamping a hand on his shoulder. Thank you. But what made you decide to share? Artie gave me a sly grin.
Besides not wanting to take a little boy's dogs away, I think they're good for you.
His answer surprised me. What makes you say that? Dahlia and Gabe laughed. What am I missing?
I never would have thought a former mobster, could love them as much as I do. I was wrong.
With that, Artie Guzman and the 3 poodle tears left my condo.
Chapter 25. Dahlia. At least someone gets their happy ending. After Artie left with the dogs, I sank onto the couch and waited for the first round of 20 questions to begin. Between Gabe and Leo, I knew I was in for it. Sitting across from me, Gabe leaned forward and rested his elbows on his knees.
Leo told me why you two decided to keep quiet about Gunnar.
It hasn't been easy. If I had to guess, I'd say Maggie had sung like a bird the moment she'd left the condo, but I kept that to myself. I wasn't upset with her, not really. She'd taken the news hard.
Are you planning to tell my parents?
Yes, I'd like for Gunnar to meet your father. The logistics of getting a toddler to Sicily would be challenging, but it was the least I could do. Thank God he has a passport and has flown before. Seemingly satisfied with my answer, Leo sat back. What happened between you and Artie? It was none of my business, but then again, turnabout was fair play. He hesitated. I gathered it had something to do with business. He knew too much about your family to be anything else. Gabe stared at his hands.
Before I took over, my father ordered me to oversee Artie's execution.
I'd assumed it was bad, but not that bad. I stilled and did my best not to let Gabe see my revulsion.
I wasn't the one who was supposed to pull the trigger, but I couldn't allow it to happen. I lied to my father's man. I told him I'd take care of it. Walked Artie into the swamp, gave him all my cash, and told him to run.
He spoke without inflection, but I could tell by the hard set of his shoulders that the ordeal had scarred him. That must have been horrible. Gabe nodded.
I've been supporting him ever since then.
Suddenly, the idea of taking Gunnar to Sicily lost its appeal. Leo returned from checking on Gunnar and plopped down beside me.
How are you holding up?
I hitched a shoulder. Stuart told you about the package?
Yeah, what was in it?
I really didn't want to get into this in front of Gabe. 8x10 glossies.
Why do you ask if Artie had seen someone on the roof?
Leo scratched his jaw, and I knew the instant he put the pieces together. His eyes widened and his mouth fell open.
Photos of us? On the couch?
Yes, here after dinner. I swallowed hard. Gabe furrowed his brow.
I'm not following. The fucker was on the deck taking pictures of us having sex.
Leo growled. A little more detail than I would have liked, but I was too tired to argue. Gabe winced and glanced at the white leather sofa as if regretting sitting on it.
You need additional security.
Leo shook his head.
No, what we need is to catch this guy and put an end to him once and for all.
I'd heard him use that tone before when speaking about the persons responsible for his brother's murder. I hadn't liked it then, and I didn't like it now. Especially not after the conversation about Artie Guzman's relationship with the Marchionnis. I'd prefer we let the police handle it. Gabe nodded, but Leo continued to glower. I mean it. You can't be a father to your son if you're in prison for murder. My throat tightened at the thought. Leo's expression softened.
I'm not going anywhere, sweetheart.
But you didn't say you wouldn't resort to violence. I opened my mouth to protest, but Gabe interrupted.
Maybe it's time the two of you got out of town. Go to Sicily for Christmas. Leave as soon as possible. In the meantime, talk to Marco about more security.
I hated the idea of leaving New Orleans, and Sicily was no longer my first choice of destinations. However, bringing Marco into the mix would take Leo a step closer to the mob. Let's go to Florida. We can leave tonight. Leo smiled for the first time since he'd returned from fishing, but it faded just as quickly as it had come.
As much as I'd love that, running away is prolonging the inevitable. We have to catch this guy.
Gabe frowned.
There's another problem to consider. You two suspect the stalker is a reporter. Do we need to worry about the images hitting the tabloids?
I shot to my feet. Oh, God, I didn't think about that.
That's all we need. Another story in the paper.
Leo gave me a look that told me he'd seen the recent article or articles. I had nothing to do with the story about the break-in or the other. Leo narrowed his eyes.
There was a story about the break-in? I should go.
Gabe stood.
You two have things to discuss.
No, stay for just a moment. You've thought of things we've missed. Besides that, I figured I'd save Leo the trouble of relaying the information later, and myself the need to call Maggie. Frowning, he took a seat. I settled beside Leo again. Shauna told me about an article in the Picayune yesterday. Somehow the paparazzi found out about the stalker. Leo pressed his lips into a line, but he didn't seem all that surprised. If anything, he seemed irritated. I took his hand. They're hinting it's you. Gabe cursed under his breath. Leo tightened his grip on my fingers.
No mention of Harrison and Gunner in that one?
No. My father told me Robert and Harry wrote that press release. He would have told me if they'd sent the other. Leo sucked in a breath.
I may have had something to do with the story about the break-in.
It was my turn to glower. What did you do?
I offered the reporters outside double the going rate for any photos of the person who broke into your house.
Gabe made a sound in his throat somewhere between a groan and a growl.
On that note, I am going to leave you two alone to work this out.
Leo pushed to his feet and followed his brother to the door. The two spoke in hushed tones, but I ignored them. I couldn't handle one more thing. Once again, it seemed like the men in my life had lost their minds. Leo returned to the sofa, only this time he sat across from me in the place Gabe had abandoned.
What happened with your father today?
Pressing my fingers to my temples, I muttered, I don't want to talk about it.
Migraine? Do you need your meds?
No, it's just stress. My mind spun like a carnival ride. We had so much to discuss that I didn't know where to begin. I confronted Harrison after I received the photos this morning.
Let me guess. He denied any involvement.
Nodding, I said, I almost believed him, but his story didn't hold up.
I'm going to make arrangements for you and Gunner to leave town.
He rested his arms on the back of the sofa and widened his thighs. Between the man-spreading and cocky set of his jaw, I wanted to scream. Did he honestly think he had the right to make that sort of proclamation? Not to mention, he'd argued with my idea of going to Florida. I don't know what part of me you forgot over the last year, but I've never been one to jump when you snap your fingers.
It wasn't an order, doll. It's for your safety. If Harrison is the stalker, now that you've confronted him, this could go two ways. He'll either slink off or become more dangerous.
Don't doll me. I'm not going anywhere without you. As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I remembered Leo with the gun in his hand and Gabe's story. Are Gunnar and I really safer with him?
What's going on? I know this is a lot, but you seem off.
I've had a really shitty day. Between Artie scaring the crap out of me, the articles, and the photos, I've had it. I caught myself yelling and lowered my voice for fear of waking Gunnar. I'll let you know if I decide it's best to leave New Orleans. He stood and offered his hand.
Come on.
Where are we going? Stupid question. We were stuck in the condo for the time being. The only place he could possibly think to take me was to bed.
And that wasn't going to happen. You're stressed. How about a back rub?
Nice try, but I'm not in the mood for sex. And that's exactly what would happen 5 minutes into said massage. Leo held up his hands.
Then take a shower, read, whatever you need to do to unwind so we can talk like rational adults.
He's calling me irrational? I huffed and strode down the hall, fully aware I was acting like a lunatic. He was right about one thing. I did need some time to myself to process everything that had happened. Leo followed me into the master bedroom.
Look, I'm going to give you space, but I need to apologize first.
Hoping against hope he'd apologize for acting like some sort of vigilante out for justice, I turned to him.
I had no idea the reporters would turn the tables on me about the stalker. I'm sorry.
Thank you, but that's not it. My chest tightened. He had no way of knowing what was really bothering me, and I doubted I could verbalize it without hurting him.
Talk to me.
He ran his hands from my shoulders to my elbows. Over the years, we'd shared our deepest, darkest secrets. I'd never hesitated to tell him what was on my mind. Until recently. As good as it felt to be with him again, we still had a wall between us to tear down. He sighed and stepped back.
When you're ready to talk, I'll be here.
I don't want you to ask Marco for help. I could tell by the way he flexed his hands that he didn't like what I'd said. I understand you want to make the stalker pay, but that side of you scares me. He arched a brow.
What side?
Isn't it enough I admitted you frightened me? Do I have to explain it?
I want to hear you say the words.
His voice flattened. You sounded like a mafioso. When I saw you with that gun, and then Gabe told me how he knew Artie. I struggled to meet his gaze. All I could think about was protecting Gunnar from the former family business.
I'm not part of that world anymore.
He sounded so defeated, every fiber of my being wanted to hold him, to apologize for overreacting, to kiss him until the pain left his eyes. I took a tentative step closer. Promise me you won't go to Marco for help.
I can't. I'd sell my soul if it meant protecting you and Gunnar.
He caught me before I could turn away.
But I will promise to only call Marco as a last resort.
What Gabe said about Artie. Have you ever been in that kind of situation? I wasn't sure I wanted the answer, but I had to know.
No.
His voice cracked.
And if I were, I would have made the same choice. I could never take an innocent life.
What about a guilty one? Once again, I held my breath, waiting for an answer I didn't want.
If it was self-defense or to stop that person from hurting someone else, then yes, I wouldn't hesitate.
He tilted his head.
Wouldn't you do the same?
Would I? I thought back to the night the stalker had broken into my house. I would have done whatever necessary to protect Gunnar, even if that meant ending a life. Yes. Leo pulled me into his arms.
I'm not a monster, doll.
I know. I breathed in his scent and wrinkled my nose. You smell like sweat, beer, and dead fish.
I've been on a boat all day and need a shower.
He flashed me a grin. I fully expected him to propose we take one together, and if he kept looking at me with that twinkle in his eye, I'd have to reconsider my anti-sex mood.
Speaking of dead fish, Dante's bringing a replacement for Gunnar's later tonight.
Leo chuckled. Can he pick up a tank with a lock on it?
Chapter 26. Leo. Thinking about my day gave me whiplash. It had started great. What's not to love about a fishing trip with my brothers? But everything had gone from bad to hellish in the blink of an eye. Although there had been a few shining moments of happiness, I never would have thought Artie would agree to co-parent the poodles. Another of those bright spots stood beside me at the bathroom sink while we brushed our teeth. There was something so weirdly intimate about tandem oral hygiene. A dance of rinsing and spitting, timed perfectly to avoid getting in each other's way. I leaned closer to the mirror to check for rogue nose and eyebrow hairs. What are the chances of getting Harrison to publicly admit he lied about Gunnar's paternity? Somewhere between fat chance and never gonna happen. She spoke with toothpaste in her mouth. Then we need to get some dirt on him. Something so juicy he'd rather be humiliated than have it come out. She rinsed and spat. Sean is trying to track down his ex-wife and the women who accused him of abuse. That could work, if one of them is willing to threaten to go public. It's a long shot. Dahlia frowned, and then her face brightened. I forgot to tell you the good thing that happened at the governor's mansion. I highly doubted anything pleasant could happen in that antebellum palace of horrors, but I refrained from commenting. What's that? My father more or less gave us his blessing. Stunned, speechless, I almost missed her slipping out of her cute little dress and stepping into the shower. As luck would have it, I turned in time to see the fabric hit the floor and her sweet ass disappearing behind the frosted glass. Dahlia peeked out. You can join me, but we have to hurry. Gunnar's going to wake up soon. I stripped and stepped in behind her. The water temperature was exactly the way I liked it. Warm enough to turn me pink, but not enough to sting. I can do quick. She bit her lip, likely holding back a smart-assed comment as she moved to give me access to the water. What exactly did the governor have to say? Dahlia's gaze roamed over my body, and a sexy little smile graced her lips. We're standing here naked and wet after an argument, and you want to talk. I'm all about quick makeup sex, but I'm curious. I reached around her, grabbed the poof, and soaped it up. He asked if I was in love with you. I told him I was, and he said he was happy for me. She lathered the shampoo until her dark hair was covered in suds. Once again, I found myself dumbstruck. How was it possible for her to be so damn sexy while doing the most mundane things? What? She laughed as she moved under the water. Wash my back. I tossed her the poof and turned. I don't get it. He's hated me since day one. Why the change? I suspect he's getting old and realizing he's wasted his youth in a bad marriage. Dahlia scrubbed with one hand and caressed with the other. My mom was full of surprises, too. She actually stood up for us. Wow, that's something. Salt, sunscreen, and sweat ran from my hair into my eyes, along with a bit of shampoo. Temporarily blinded, I asked, Did Robert behave himself? Dahlia didn't respond. I didn't need the benefit of sight to know she'd frowned. He threatened me or you or both of us if I didn't end our relationship. The typical, you're risking your father's career routine. I placed my hands on her waist and changed positions. Standing under the water, I chose my words carefully. After all, she had said something about a quickie. The last thing I wanted to do was spoil her mood. He's looking out for your father and his job, but that doesn't give him the right to threaten you. He's all bark and no bite. I opened my eyes and caught her staring below the waist. Want me to wash your front? She released an impatient huff. Sure, if that's how you want to spend our limited time. I liked this new and needy side of her. In fact, I liked it so much, I decided to play a little game to see who caved first. I ran the sponge over her chest, making extra sure her breasts were squeaky clean. She turned toward the spray, but I stopped her. Not so fast. Why waste perfectly good body wash? She gave me a dubious look. I pulled her chest to mine and rubbed against her until we were equally sunsy. Laughing, Dahlia draped her arms over my shoulders. Kiss me already. I leaned in and she met me in the middle. Her lips played across mine as I explored her lower back and butt. You're beautiful. I tugged her head to the side and kissed a line from her ear to her collarbone. Dahlia hooked her leg around my waist, and my brain short-circuited. I eased her against the wall and ran my fingers down her chest, drawing circles around her breasts. I love these. They missed you today. God, I loved this woman. Is that right? Yes, but they're feeling neglected. You didn't even kiss them. Hello. She watched as I leaned forward and flicked my tongue over her nipple. Her half-lidded smile almost killed my resolve to tease her. Almost. I slid my hand down her belly. Dahlia's breath caught. Leo. I released her breast and moved to the other. She wobbled, but I had no intentions of letting her fall. I want you. In a minute. I dropped to my knees and stared up at her while running my hands over her hips and thighs. We don't have time for this. Dahlia closed her eyes and rested her head against the cool marble wall. It won't take long. I eased her legs apart. At the first stroke of my tongue, she hissed out a breath. Should I stop? I licked her again. Don't you dare. I added my fingers to the mix, stroking, sucking, biting, teasing, until she tangled her fingers in my hair and held me where she wanted me. Exactly where I wanted to be. On my heels with my face buried between her legs. Dahlia's thighs quivered, but that didn't stop her from grinding against my mouth. I'm going to come. Don't let me fall. I braced her with my shoulders and doubled down, working her faster and harder. She held her breath, her body tensed. It was as if my entire world zeroed in on pushing her over the edge. Dahlia cried out for me to stop, to continue to finish her, and then she shattered. I didn't stop. Not when she tried to squirm away, not when she begged, not when her body shuddered with aftershocks. Enough! Dahlia sagged, bent in half over my head and shoulders. I pushed to my feet and wrapped my arms around her limp body. Let's get you dried off. Give me a minute to catch my breath, and I'll return the favor. Liking the sound of that, I dried her, wrapped her hair in one towel, her body in the other, and repeated the process on myself. Without the towel turban, of course. Once I had her in bed, I brushed her damp hair from her eyes. Remember how to breathe yet? You're awfully full of yourself, Marchionni. What can I say? I'm proud of my skills. She ran her hand down my chest and wrapped her hand around my cock. I'd like to see more of these skills of yours. Is that right? Take me from behind. Dahlia wiggled her brows. Have I mentioned how much I love doggy style? I flipped her onto her stomach and grabbed her hips. I remember. With her on all fours, I couldn't resist leaving a handprint on her creamy white ass. She let out a half yelp, half moan, and I thrust inside her. Between the foreplay in the shower and the current rush of sensations, I had to work hard to keep myself in check, or it'd be over entirely too quickly. She lowered her chest to the bed. Her dark hair splayed across the white sheets, eyes closed, lips parted. Between the stunning visual and the moans and whimpers falling from her luscious mouth, I couldn't hold back. My release hit me like a freight train. Before I had a chance to recover from the sensory overload, Dahlia turned over and wrapped her fingers around my cock again. I pulled back. Way too sensitive. Not giving up, she slid her hand over my length. I bit back a groan. You have to stop. Dahlia the minx laughed and let go. I fell to my side with my hand covering the goods in case she had any more ideas of torturing me. That was incredible. She rested her chin on my shoulder and acted all innocent as she trailed her fingers down the hair between my navel and the no-go zone. "Mama?" The doorknob turned. Dahlia darted upright, grabbed the sheet, and covered our important bits. Gunnar burst into the room, flashed us a huge smile, and bounded for the bed. I had no idea how to respond. He'd been sound asleep when we'd made love on the couch. Before we'd split, he'd been too young to get out of his crib. Would Gunnar end up in therapy for his entire adult life after finding us naked beneath the sheets? Dahlia, God bless her, managed to keep him on top of the covers. "Did you have a good nap?" He rubbed his eyes, yawned, and cuddled between us. "Is the bad man gone?" "Yes, but he's not bad. He surprised me is all." She bugged her eyes out at me. Great. How do I explain this? "His name is Artie. He's Fifi, Cupcake, and Eugene's owner." I smoothed back his wild curls. "Where are they?" His green eyes widened. Shit. Dahlia rescued me again. "They're having a sleepover at Mr. Artie's house." "Uncle Gabe?" I couldn't help but smile. I had waited 2.5 years to introduce my son to my family. He had to go home to his kids. "You remember Ella and Rocco?" Dahlia asked. Gunnar seemed unimpressed. "Bunny milk, please." She sat upright. "Go to the kitchen. I'll be right there." He folded his arms. "Daddy, get it." "Go ahead. I'll be there in a second." He glanced between us and narrowed his eyes, as if wondering what we were up to. When neither of us flinched, he hurried out of the room and didn't bother to close the door. Dahlia burrowed back into the pillows. "I can get used to this." So can I. For her, my taking care of Gunnar was a reprieve. For me, it was pure gold.
Chapter 27. Dahlia. I woke wrapped in nothing but the decadently soft sheets. The scents of bacon and coffee warmed me. Leo and Gunnar's laughter drifting down the hall was better than any music. I had no idea what they'd thought was so funny, nor did I need to know. That Leo could find joy with his son while our world spun out of control gave me hope. We'll get through this. I hadn't completely let go of my fears that Leo would trip and fall back into the Cosa Nostra, but I'd believed him when he said he didn't want that life. Listening to him play with Gunnar reassured me he had his priorities straight. The ringing buzzer in the front of the house ruined my good mood. Someone was at the door, which meant our bubble of domestic bliss was about to pop. Muttering to myself, I crawled out of bed and went into the bathroom to clean up. One look in the mirror, and I decided to hide out in the bedroom rather than greet whoever had stopped by. I'd fallen asleep with wet hair, which had dried into a complete mess. I had beard burn around my mouth and chin, and unless I was mistaken, a hickey on my neck. Hot sex did awful things to pale skin, and we'd gone at it numerous times the night before. A knock on the bedroom door sent me into a panic. "Just a minute." I snatched the robe from the hook and hustled to get my hair into what I hoped would pass for a messy bun. "We don't have a minute. We need to go to—" Shauna stood a few feet inside the room with her hands on her hips and her mouth hanging open. "Don't." I shot her a death glare. "All of this?" She motioned from the bed to me and toward the kitchen. "Is blowing my mind. I know you have a kid together, but you two have denied having sex for so long. It's like waking up one morning and finding out unicorns exist." Very funny. As much as I tried to remain stoic, I grinned. Her eyes widened. "Is that a hickey?" My hand flew to my neck. "Where do we need to go?" "Oh, right." She shook her head. "I found the former Mrs. Merriweather. She's agreed to meet us for lunch." "Lunch?" I gawked at the clock. "Yes, sleeping not-so-beauty. It's almost noon." "Where?" Not that it mattered, but I was too stunned to ask an intelligent question. "A private room at Enzo's." She glanced at my crazy hair. "You need to hurry. She'll be there in 20 minutes." 20 hours isn't enough time. What should I know going in? I pulled a sweater and jeans from the closet and a clean pair of panties from the drawer. Rather than shouting through the bathroom door, I turned my back, dropped my robe, and stepped into my undies. Shauna was one of my best friends. She'd seen my ass more than I had. We'd shared clothes since high school. Shauna cracked up. Holy handprint, Batman. I never would have pegged Leo as the 50 Shades type. Glancing over my shoulder, I arched a brow. You're teasing me? When you're the one who got her freak on with Enzo at the Mardi Gras ball the night you met? We didn't have sex until months later. She smirked. And let me tell you, kink must run in their blood. Way too much information. I pulled the sweater over my head and shimmied into my jeans. Talk to me about Elise Merriweather. She's in town a couple of days visiting her sister in Metairie. She goes by Elle McGuire now and hates Harrison with a purple flaming passion. Nodding, I went into the bathroom to tame my hair. That's understandable, but why did she agree to see us? Hate was a start, but I needed her to be willing to go public with the story. Most importantly, I needed her to be credible. I told her about Gunnar. She followed me. While I didn't like the idea of using my son as an excuse, I was desperate enough to ignore my morals for the time being. What does she do for a living? Criminal charges? Any hint of scandal around her? Shauna flashed me a smile. You're going to love this. Elle McGuire runs a homeless shelter in Orlando. She's married to the pastor of one of the largest churches in the state. And wait for it. She drummed her hands on the countertop. She has 5 adopted children, all from women who've died of drug overdoses. Mrs. McGuire might as well have Saint tattooed on her forehead. Perfect. What, if anything, did you tell Leo about this? Same thing I told you. Perfect. Let's go. I pulled my boots on and headed for the kitchen. Leo nodded to the food on the table. Want something before you go? Shauna snagged 2 pieces of bacon, wrapped them in a pancake, and dipped the concoction in syrup. When she caught me grinning, she said, Don't say a word. This isn't for me, it's for the baby. Leo folded his arms. I want to come with you. We can handle it. Shauna took a huge bite. Besides, we'll have Stuart with us. He didn't seem impressed. We'll be careful, I said. Careful, Mama. Gunnar held his sticky hands out to me. Bye, kiss. Leo nodded. Call me at the first sign of trouble. After a quick kiss on the cheek for Gunnar and one on the mouth for Leo, we left the condo via the rooftop access to the building next door. Once inside, we hurried to the first floor. Stuart, even more vigilant than usual, led the way. I hadn't asked, but I assumed Leo had given him hell for leaving the condo unlocked and unarmed. The man barely met my eyes, and when he did, he looked away as if afraid I'd turn him to stone if he stared too long. The paparazzi were lying in wait for us at the rear entrance of the store. I'd known the secret escape route wouldn't stay secret forever, but the timing absolutely sucked. The reporters shouted questions about Harry, Gunnar, the stalker, Leo, my sex life. You name it, they asked, but I ignored them. Shauna leaned close. How do you deal with this day in and day out? They'll move on. All we have to do is give them a better story. Stuart pulled me against a building to shield me from the cameras. We should drive. The restaurant is 2 blocks away. It'll take too long to get the car and fight the traffic. Shauna pointed to a narrow space between the buildings. It's best if we take the service roads and stay off the sidewalks. We'll be fine once we're inside. He frowned, but did as we'd asked. The damned paparazzi dogged us until we reached the edge of Enzo's employee parking lot, and I immediately knew why. The flashing lights and dozens of police officers, paramedics, and other first responders were far more interesting than a presidential candidate's daughter's love life. I stopped and stared, trying to make sense of the situation. What's going on? Looks like a murder. The color drained from Shauna's face. That's the coroner's van, and I recognize at least 4 homicide detectives. I need to find Enzo.
They aren't going to let us into a crime scene,
Stewart said. Who said anything about walking through their crime scene? She smirked and strode toward the far side of the building. I followed, but the closer we came to the chaos, the more my stomach hurt. On average, a murder took place every 3 days in New Orleans, but there were far fewer in the French Quarter. Random violence happened, but I couldn't shake the feeling this wasn't random at all. Shauna, besides Elle, who knew we were coming here?
I didn't tell anyone besides Leo.
She stepped through the side door and waited for us to follow.
Don't assume what's going on back there has anything to do with you. Stay close.
Stewart didn't sound as optimistic. In fact, his entire body hummed with tension. She led us to a small private dining room off the kitchen. Elle isn't here yet. Maybe she got held up in traffic. I'd said the right thing, but the pit in my stomach grew exponentially. Maybe. Shauna grabbed a passing server's arm. What happened outside? The young man glanced between us.
Some lady was shot. Enzo's out back talking to the police.
Thanks. She turned to me and Stewart. I'll go see what I can find out. Wait here in case Elle shows. Okay. I took a seat at the beautifully set table. Stewart walked to the window and pushed the Roman shade aside. Seemingly satisfied with whatever he'd seen, he moved to the second window. At the third, he cursed under his breath.
Can you describe the woman you're meeting?
My heart leaped into my throat, and I leaped to my feet. Why?
Stay there. You don't need to see this.
See what? I moved closer despite my growing fear. He turned and placed his huge body between me and the window.
Do you know what she looks like?
Early 40s, blonde. I thought back to the pictures I'd seen of Harrison's ex-wife. Thin. The muscle on the side of his jaw bulged. Can you see the victim from the window?
Yes.
I doubt I'd recognize her. I've only ever seen evidence photos. She was beaten up pretty bad. I pressed my hand to my chest. Is the victim blonde?
Yes.
Shauna came back into the dining room with Enzo and 2 officers behind her. Oh, God. It was her? It was Harrison's ex-wife? I knew the answer before I'd asked. Why else would the police have followed her inside? According to her ID, yes. Shauna clung to Enzo. But it was hard to tell. Her face was a mess. This is my fault. Someone killed her because she was mating with me. My knees buckled, but Stewart caught me before I fell. We spent the next 2 hours answering questions. More than once, I wished I'd thought to call my father before agreeing to speak with the police, but I couldn't bring myself to do it. Partly because I didn't have the energy to wait for his lawyers to arrive from Baton Rouge, but mostly because he was involved in this somehow. Maybe not directly, but either Harrison or his people had killed Elle McGuire. For the second time in their lives, 5 children had lost a mother. A husband had lost his wife. A congregation, their first lady. And countless homeless people a champion. All because I needed dirt on Harrison. I'd have a conversation with my father once we were alone. It was time I got some answers. After the police left, Stewart cleared his throat.
Are you ready to go home?
Yes, please. I stood slowly to make sure my legs wouldn't fail me again.
I had one of my colleagues bring my vehicle. Wait here until I call. I'll be in front of the side alley.
He didn't bother to wait for me to reply before he marched out of the dining room. I understood his behavior, to a point. We'd both screwed up when we'd forgotten to lock the door, but Leo had blamed Stuart. His job was to protect me, but I hadn't made it any easier on him. In hindsight, I could see how my insisting we walk to Enzo's made it 1,000 times more difficult to protect me. However, his brusque tone wore on my last nerve. He'd stormed out before I could clarify which alley to meet him and the safest exit. After all, the building had 4 walls, a front, a back, and 2 sides. Enzo rested his hand on my shoulder.
I'll escort you to Stuart's vehicle.
Thank you. I glanced around for Shauna to say goodbye. She stood in the corner of the room with a homicide detective she knew from work. They had their heads together, and judging by the way they glanced at me from time to time, I assumed I was the topic of the conversation. Enzo was Leo's least favorite brother, but I'd always liked him. He was different than the others, more of a loner than one of the pack. He had a legendary temper and a tendency to hold on to a grudge. None of that mattered to me. The fact that he loved Shauna fiercely made up for his more annoying traits. He motioned to the door.
I'll take you out the back way. It's longer, but it's far more private.
Thank goodness he knows where to meet the moody bodyguard. Stuart said to stay here. He'd call when he was in place. I hated to argue, but I'd decided to do better at following orders, at least the ones that directly affected my safety.
Yes, but what he doesn't know is that area is a no parking zone. With a police presence, he won't be able to wait long.
Enzo waved to his wife on our way out the door. Shauna met my gaze and held her hand to her ear like a telephone receiver. I nodded and followed Enzo through the kitchen to a narrow brick hall. The space was so short, we had to duck as we walked. Is this an old servants' hall?
Yes, the building was originally a large residence.
He bumped his head on a low-hanging brick and laughed.
People were much shorter back then.
I bet the paranormal tour companies would pay a small fortune to bring tourists back here.
But then everyone would know about the passage and it would be no use to me.
He dragged his hand over the uneven wall.
I use it to escort celebrities and dignitaries in and out of the building unseen.
And cheating spouses? I had no idea where that thought had come from, but it made him chuckle.
That too.
Enzo opened an ancient-looking wooden door just enough to see the street.
Stuart isn't here. I'll stay with you until he arrives.
The cool night air caused a shiver to run through me.
Where's your jacket?
I hadn't missed it until that moment. I must have left it in the dining room, but there isn't time to go back for it. I'll get it the next time I see Shauna. He frowned.
I'd offer you my chef's coat, but Shauna says it smells like dirty feet and garlic.
I'll be okay. It's a short walk from the door to the car. For a politician's daughter, I sucked at small talk. More like, I hated it. Besides, there was a huge elephant crowding the hall. Enzo had spent the morning with Leo. He had to know about Gunnar. Leo and I are going to introduce our son to your mom soon. His smile lit his entire face.
And me? When do I get to meet him? Shauna tells me he looks like his cousins.
You and Shauna are welcome to visit any time. I'm sure Gunnar will be tickled to meet another uncle.
We'll stop by tomorrow and bring your jacket.
I wouldn't have thought it possible, but Enzo's smile widened.
We are expecting a child.
His enthusiasm was contagious. I didn't care what Leo said about him. Enzo might have had a crunchy shell, but he was all sweet and gooey in the center. Congratulations. He glanced outside again.
Stuart's here. Stay close.
Okay. I followed him into the mouth of the alley, but before we reached the sidewalk, he slung his arm around my shoulders and tugged me closer.
Sorry to manhandle you.
He tightened his grip.
Keep your head down.
So many people moved around us, I had the sensation of swimming against the current. I stared at the crowd's feet. Men's shoes, women's shoes, a tiny pair of sneakers. Half of New Orleans must have been in the quarter. A brownish-orange pair of Italian loafers caught my eye. Leo would love those. "Enzo!" a female voice called from the crowd. Two loud bangs like firecrackers sounded to my left. Enzo crashed into me as if someone had pushed him. At first, I thought he must have had a pen or a paring knife in his pocket because pain seared through my side. But then I saw it. Blood. Dark red blood stained the front of his white chef's coat. Warm liquid ran down my left side, and it felt as though someone had taken a blowtorch to my ribs. We were shot? Before I could sort it out, Enzo tugged me close, weaker this time, and stumbled toward the waiting SUV.
Chapter 28, Leo. I set the worn copy of The Very Hungry Caterpillar on the dresser and stared down at the sleeping child. It had taken 2 stories, but I'd managed to get him to take a nap without a tantrum. And then my phone rang. I fumbled to get the damn thing out of my pocket. Gunnar sat upright and glared at me as if I'd tricked him, which I suppose I had. Marchionni.
This is Artie Guzman. There's a problem with Eugene. He's refusing to eat.
His nasally voice drilled into my ear. That's odd. Normally, Eugene had the biggest appetite of all the poodles. I'd sworn the pup would eat until he fell over if given the chance. Did you follow the recipe I sent you?
Yes, of course, he sighed. I think he misses you. Can I bring the 3 poodle tears to your place for dinner?
Sure, I'll be here. If not, you have the key and the alarm code. I'd questioned my sanity when I'd given him access to my condo, but he'd insisted on taking over dog-walking responsibilities on my nights with the dogs.
Very good indeed. See you tonight.
He hung up. The phone rang again. Artie, did you forget something? Sirens wailed in the background, but Stuart's voice came through loud and clear. Enzo and Dahlia were shot. They were taken to Tulane Medical Center an hour ago. My brain misfired. Shot? An hour? What the fuck? I would have called sooner, but my phone was in the SUV when the police arrived. Nothing he said made any sense, but I didn't give a rat's ass where he'd left his phone. I grabbed the shiny blanket and Gunnar and headed for the door. How bad? I didn't get a good look at the wounds. Enzo was in bad shape. Stuart took a deep breath. Dahlia was bleeding from her side, but conscious. Shauna went with her in the ambulance. I grabbed my keys from the counter and ran to the elevator. Not with Enzo? They didn't give her the option. I could barely hear him over Gunnar's cries. Where are you? Following Dahlia's ambulance. How did this happen? Did you see who did this? I tucked Gunnar close and barreled out of the building. I had to run the gauntlet of reporters, some of whom had learned of the shooting before me. Forget it. We'll talk when I get there. I'll call Marco. Someone should speak to your mother. Oh, God. Ma. She's going to flip. Thank you. I pressed the key fob to unlock my car, buckled Gunnar in, and damn near plowed down a reporter or 2 as I sped toward the hospital. It's okay, Gunnar. Please stop crying. I'd longed for the day I could tell my mother he was my son since before he'd been born, but I'd never imagined it would happen like this. Dahlia and I had been through more shit than any 2 people should have to endure. We loved, we'd split, and we'd found each other again. We were so fucking close, I could taste the happily ever after on her lips. I raised my hand to take my frustration out on the steering wheel, but caught sight of Gunnar in the rear view and stopped. He had a wide-eyed, terrified expression. The last thing he needed was me freaking the hell out. What the hell am I going to do if she doesn't make it? The thought clouded my vision. Wiping my eyes on the back of my hand, I white-knuckled the wheel and focused on the road. She'll make it, I nodded to myself. She loves us too much to leave us, buddy. Don't you worry. Your mama's going to be okay. As soon as I left the quarter, traffic came to a standstill. Come on. I drummed my fingers on my thigh.
Come on, Daddy.
Gunnar grinned through his tears and snot. Hey, little man, why don't you tell me a story for a change? He giggled but launched into his version of the Caterpillar book. I made the appropriate encouraging sounds, but I'd stopped listening after the first few words. I thought I'd come out of my skin before I reached the exit. 20 minutes later, I turned into the emergency room entrance and into a circus. Camera crews and satellite trucks had set up shop in the parking lot. I recognized cable news and a couple of national networks. What I didn't recognize was a place to park. I slowed, grabbed my phone, and called Gabe. Leo, Where are you?" His voice came out breathless, as if he'd run down 10 flights of stairs. "We've been here for an hour." I assumed Shauna had called them. Too bad no one but the incompetent bodyguard had thought to notify me. "Looking for a place to park. I left the house as soon as Stuart called." "Pull onto the grass if you have to. Just get in here. Dahlia's doctor was looking for her next of kin." Those 3 words, next of kin, made it difficult to breathe. The last time I'd heard them was the night my brother and his wife had died in a car accident that hadn't been an accident at all. Some son of a bitch had tampered with their vehicle. "Is she?" I refused to finish the sentence. "She's alive, but they won't tell us anything. Hang on." A rustling sound came over the line. A few seconds later, Gabe was back. "I told them you were her fiancé, but they are trying to reach her father. Someone should call him, but it'll take him at least an hour to get here." I circled the lot again with no luck. "The media set up camp. There's nowhere to park." He sighed. "Listen to me. Park in the grass. If you're towed, we'll deal with it." I glanced at the sleeping toddler in the back seat. "I'm going to the main entrance. Gunner doesn't need to have people shouting questions about his mom's condition." "You brought him? What the hell was I supposed to do? Leave him home alone?" I cut the wheel and headed for the front of the hospital. "I'll have Maggie take him back to your place." "Sure." I rolled past a mob of reporters outside the glass doors leading to the lobby. "There's more reporters out front." I'd had it with the press. "Screw it. I'm pulling into the portico. Be there in 5. "Leo, wait. Ma's here." I figured. I disconnected, threw my phone on the passenger seat, and parked a few feet from the doors. I figured my car was a goner no matter where I left it. I might as well get as close as possible. Hell, at that point, I would have driven it into the lobby if it meant getting to Dahlia quicker. The questions started before I managed to unbuckle the little guy from his car seat. Reporters shouted bullshit about suspects, Dahl's condition, the governor's whereabouts, Harrison, the stalker, and my relationship to Ms. Calhoun. Ignoring every fucking one of them, I wrapped Gunner in the shiny blanket and pressed his head to my shoulder. The least I could do was hide his face from the vultures. If everything went to shit, there wouldn't be photos of me carrying him into the hospital the night he lost his mother. He struggled to look around, but I held him tight. "It's okay. I've got you. You're safe." I'd said something similar to Dahlia. Fat load of good it had done. In the end, my promises had been empty. Someone had gotten to her, and Enzo. Shauna's pregnant, damn it. She must be a basket case. Once inside, I peeled the blanket back to give Gunner some air and speed-walked down the corridor. "Daddy?" He glanced around wide-eyed. "Where are we at?" "We're going to meet your Uncle Gabe. Remember him? He's going to take care of you for a little while, okay?" I wove through the maze of a hospital. Gunner nodded and shoved his thumb in his mouth. The emergency waiting room was standing room only, but I didn't recognize a soul. Where the hell are they? I strode toward the desk, but Dante caught up to me midway. His eyes were red and swollen, but he managed to smile. "They're both going to be okay." Thank Christ. I struggled to hold back my tears for Gunner's sake. "Where is everyone?" "This way." He nodded to the woman at the desk, and she pushed a security button. The set of double doors to the right whooshed open to reveal more chaos than I'd encountered in the parking lot. Doctors, nurses, and who the hell knew what else darted in all directions. Some wheeling patients, some carrying handheld computers, and others had their hands full of meds and IV bags. No one stood still. Dante led us through the beehive of medical staff to a small waiting room. My entire family turned and stared, including my mother. Shit. Evelyn Marchionni sat in the middle seat facing the door as if waiting. Even from a distance, I could tell she muttered a prayer as she glanced from me to the child in my arms. Maggie gave me a sympathetic smile, as did Gabe, but no one could save me from what I was about to face. Marco took a step in my direction, but Nico, his wife, put her hand on his arm and shook her head. "I need to see Dahlia." I had spoken to the group, but the declaration was for my mother. We'd have plenty of time to discuss her grandchild later. "Mama is here?" Gunner perked up. "I see her?" "Soon, but I need to talk to her first, okay?" He tensed and made his pre-tantrum face, eyes narrowed, mouth open. Much to my surprise, he sighed and rested his head on my shoulder. Shauna walked into the room, stiff and stone-faced. "Enzo's in surgery to remove the bullet. There doesn't appear to be any damage to his internal organs, but the docs will know more once they get in and look around." My mom pressed her hand to her chest and hung her head. "Is Dahlia back there? Can you take me to her?" I locked eyes with Shauna. Besides needing to see my girl, I had questions. About 1,000,000 of them. If anyone knew what the hell had happened, she would. She nodded to Gunnar. Message received. Hey, buddy, how about you let Uncle Gabe hold you for a few minutes while I talk to the doctors? He lifted his head at the mention of doctors. Mommy sick? Yeah, Mommy's sick, but she's going to get better soon. I motioned to Gabe. My mother cut him off and rushed forward like a 5'0" linebacker. I'll take him. Gunnar stared at her for a heartbeat before grabbing my face and turning my head toward his. The little guy tried to whisper, but he ended up sounding more like Michael Keaton playing Batman. Who is that? I didn't want to get into this now. I needed to see Dahlia more than I needed air. But as always, my mother had forced my hand. I got it. I did. I would have bulldozed my way to the kiddo, too. This is your Nana Evelyn. He wrinkled his brow, having no idea what Nana meant. Grandma. She's your grandma. Rocco and Ella call her Nani or Nonina. Nonina. His lips curled into a devilish grin. Yes, Nina? Laughing, my mother held her arms out to him. Come, there are books on the table over there, and I just might have some toys in my purse. Gunnar turned to me and raised his brows. Can I, Daddy? He calls you Daddy. Evelyn covered her mouth with her fist and closed her eyes tight. I recognized the expression. If someone didn't do something fast, she would burst into tears, and I might never get out of the waiting room. The little guy seemed to pick up on her stress and clung tighter. Gabe stepped forward and held his arms out to the boy. Come on, Gunnar. Let's see what trouble we can get into. He leaped from my arms and wrapped himself around my brother like an overgrown spider monkey. Thank God. I hauled ass out of the room with abso-freaking-lutely no idea where I was going other than away before Gunnar changed his mind or my mother started the waterworks. Shauna caught up to me near the nurse's station. Slow down. I want to talk to you before we see Dahlia. Nodding, I pulled her to the other side of the hall and out of the way of the staff. How bad are their injuries? Enzo was lucky. One bullet grazed him and the other missed his heart by an inch. Her voice cracked, but she tightened her jaw. Dahlia was very lucky. She'll be discharged tonight with a superficial gunshot wound. The words lucky and bullet didn't belong in the same thought. What the hell happened? Someone killed Elise Merriweather, a.k.a. Elle McGuire, near the back entrance of the restaurant. She balled her hands. You two were gone for hours. If Harry's ex was dead when you got there, why hang around? Because I owed it to the victim to tell the authorities what I knew. Her voice hardened. Right. Sorry. I'm still trying to piece this all together. I drew her into an embrace. How are you feeling? Physically? Fine, but don't say anything about the pregnancy in front of your mother. We were waiting until Christmas to... She pulled away, turned, wiped her eyes, and drew a deep breath. When she turned back around, she wore a stoic expression. That's one hell of a cop face. Dahlia and I were questioned about Harrison, the stalker, and the governor. Has anyone contacted Waylon Calhoun? Shauna leveled me with a stare. Not yet. I wanted to know what had happened and her status. She frowned. You should have called him right away. I guarantee the chief of police called as soon as Dahlia's name came up in the investigation. Great. Just fucking great. The last thing I wanted to deal with was Governor Calhoun. He might have given us his blessing, but he and I had a decade-long Cold War to overcome. What happened after the police questioned you? Stuart left to get the SUV. She sighed and folded her arms. Enzo took Dahlia out through the secret hall. They were shot between the exit and the vehicle. Stuart was 4 feet away and didn't see the shooter. I ran through the scenario she'd laid out, but it didn't add up. How is that possible? It's the holidays. The sidewalk was crowded. Her frown deepened. Whoever did this knew about the secret exit and was waiting for her. My guess is Enzo got in the way. I leaned close and lowered my voice. You and I both know who did this. My money is on Harrison or someone on his payroll, but it's too soon to know for sure. Shauna's expression darkened. Leo, when the perp realizes Dahlia's still alive, he won't get the chance to finish what he started. I swear on my life, I'm not letting her out of my sight. She opened her mouth as if she had more to say, but snapped it shut and nodded to the glass door behind me. She's in there. I replayed our conversation, hoping to God that Dahlia hadn't overheard the bit about the shooter trying again. Yes, Stuart's with her. I turned, but she stayed put. Are you coming?
No, go ahead. I need to be near the waiting room, in case the doctors...
I pulled her into another hug. Enzo is tough. He's going to be okay. Shauna nodded and hurried away. I waited until she disappeared from view before poking my head inside the tiny room. Much to my surprise, Dahlia was sitting on the edge of the gurney, swinging her legs back and forth like a nervous child. Stuart stood, nodded, and left the room without a word. Dahlia glanced up and smiled. A fraction of a second later, her chin quivered and her eyes brimmed with tears. "Oh, honey." I hurried to her with every intention of embracing her, but hesitated. "I want to hold you, but I don't know where to touch. Where does it hurt?" She pulled her hospital gown to the side to reveal bandages on her side, just below her rib cage. Though she wore a hospital gown, she'd kept her panties. The once pretty pink material was stained reddish-brown. Blood. Her blood. When I find the SOB responsible for this. I don't know what she saw in my expression, but she touched my chest. "It looks worse than it is. It hardly hurts." That's good. I suspected the IV in her arm provided a steady drip of pain meds, but I kept that thought to myself. Rather than hug her, I cupped her face and pressed my brow to hers. Once again, I had a million things to say to her, but couldn't find the words. "I love you." "I love you too." She eased her arms around my waist and rested her head on my chest. "Where's Gunnar?" "He's safe with Gabe and the rest of my family." Gasping, she pulled away. "You introduced him to your mother?" "I did, and it went well. She was on good behavior. Very little drama." She smirked.
Maybe I should get shot again before we introduce him to your father.
Not funny.
Too soon?
I sighed. "Sweetheart, I doubt I will ever be able to joke about this." A familiar baritone voice with a smooth-as-honey southern accent boomed outside the glass door. "Which one of these goldfish bowls is Dahlia Calhoun's?" The color leached from her face.
"You called my dad?"
Chapter 29. Dahlia. My father and Leo hadn't been in the same room since the day after someone had murdered Joe and Rebecca Marchionni. The visit had ended with me in tears and Leo banished from all things Calhoun, including me and the child growing in my belly. This time is different. Or is it? I'm not pregnant, and no one died, but it feels far too similar. My father came through the door like a tidal wave, only to stop cold at the sight of Leo and me embracing.
Sorry to interrupt.
Leo tensed, but rather than let go of me, he held a little tighter. For the sake of keeping the peace, I eased back. Dad, you didn't have to come. I'm okay. The doctor signed my discharge orders a few minutes ago. I'll be out of here as soon as the nurses do the paperwork.
Nonsense.
He glanced between Leo and me.
I would have been here sooner, but I only found out you were hurt an hour ago.
He hadn't come right out and accused us of keeping secrets, but his tone said it all. Leo ran his hand over the back of his neck.
I apologize. I should have called as soon as I heard. I wasn't exactly thinking straight. No need for apologies. We're all here now.
My father moved closer and Leo stepped back to give him some room.
I understand Enzo was seriously injured. What is his condition?
Guilt tightened my chest every time someone mentioned Enzo. Moments before shots rang out, we had been discussing him becoming a father. He'd seemed so happy. Afterward, there had been so much blood and confusion and noise, screaming people moving in all directions. Some ran into buildings, others ran out. Too many people for Stuart to drive us to safety. And then Shauna had been with us in the back seat of the SUV, shouting and holding Enzo's limp body, begging him not to leave her.
Dahlia?
My father touched my shoulder.
Darlin', are you sure you're all right?
I'm fine. I dipped my chin to hide the lie. But I'll be better once I'm home. Leo squeezed my hand.
Hang in there a little longer.
I'm trying. I forced a smile.
You've made it clear you don't want to move into the governor's mansion, but I wish you'd reconsider. Just for a few days, until the police sort this out.
The governor looked at Leo as if expecting backup. No, I said at the same time Leo said,
Good idea.
What? I couldn't believe he'd agreed. Has he lost his mind? Absolutely not. I'm exhausted. Gunner's probably scared to death. We need to be in our own beds. I folded my arms, but the movement pulled the stitches on my side. A lightning bolt of pain shot from one side to the other.
Easy there.
Leo helped me to lie back.
The extra security for you and Gunner would be nice, but you don't have to make a decision right now. You're welcome to stay with her, Leo.
My dad patted my calf.
I'd like the chance to get to know the man who stole your heart all those years ago.
Oh, he's playing dirty. I'll think about it, but not tonight. I hated the idea. Even with Leo by my side, I didn't want to be anywhere near Robert or my mother. I wanted to curl up on the marshmallow couch and watch the lights blink on the Christmas tree while Gunner played with his toys.
That's all I can ask.
My dad lowered his voice.
I understand you were with Shauna. How is she holding up?
As well as can be expected. Last I heard, Enzo is in surgery. Shauna and I had been friends since high school. At first, my father hadn't known what to make of her snarky humor, but he'd come to consider her an adopted daughter, until she'd made the fatal flaw of marrying a Marchionni. He folded his arms as if preparing to launch into a lecture.
You two were meeting Harrison's ex-wife? This isn't the time,
Leo said. While I appreciated his concern, I wasn't in the mood for chivalry. In fact, the conversation about going to Baton Rouge had left me downright cranky. It's okay. The sooner we know who did this and why, the sooner I'll feel safe.
You should know Harry was with me today. We were going over the latest poll numbers from about noon until I got the call,
Dad said. I met his gaze and raised my chin. You and I both know that people like Harrison never do their own dirty work.
You're right about that, but he heard about the shootings the same time I did. He was shocked.
He held his hands up.
And before you say it, the man is a piss-poor actor.
I disagreed. In fact, I believed Harry deserved an Academy Award for hiding his violent side from me for over a year. Who else would want both me and his ex-wife dead?
That's the million-dollar question. It turns out there was security footage of your shooting.
He pulled his phone out.
Are you up for taking a look?
Video? Of the shooting? Of Enzo? The alarm on the machine monitoring my vitals went off. No surprise. My heart felt like it would explode any second. Rather than giving in to my roller coaster of emotions, I settled on one: anger. I wanted to know who the hell tried to kill me. Leo sucked in a breath.
She's been through enough today. It can wait. I agree, but if she recognizes the assailant, the police.
Both of you, stop talking about me as if I'm not here. Let me see it. I held up my hand. And press the silent button on that damned monitor, will you? Leo and my father exchanged glances. I'd wanted them to have the kind of relationship that allowed for family dinners, father and son-in-law golf outings, and good-natured ribbing for as long as Leo and I had dated. However, I was beginning to see a huge problem with it. They were both overprotective to the point of being overbearing. Although me watching the video had been his idea, my dad hesitated.
Leo's right. You're going to have to give a statement tomorrow. It's probably best to wait and see the footage at the station.
You mean the sanitized version that only shows the shooter? I motioned for the phone. No thanks. I want to see all of it. He fiddled with his cell before handing it to me.
You both should see it.
Leo frowned and leaned close to get a better view. I pressed play and did my best to watch the recording with a sense of detachment. That's not me. That's no one I know. It's like the countless other security videos they show on the news. Strangers.
Christ.
Leo looked away.
Enzo saved your life.
I don't want to think about what would have happened if he hadn't gotten me to the SUV. I scrolled back and watched again. This time I pressed pause on an image of a person with something in her hand. The camera angle didn't show the gun, but judging by the way she held her arm, I didn't know what else it could be. I zoomed in on the still frame and showed it to Leo.
That's a woman.
He furrowed his brow. My father shook his head.
The woman isn't the shooter. She either screams or shouts, likely after the gun went off. Watch it again and pay attention to the large man with the hat.
I nudged Leo. Get Stewart. He was parked a few feet away. Something in the video could jog his memory. He asked the bodyguard to step inside. The three of us studied the video, pausing it and moving it in slow motion 3 more times.
I noticed her running toward the restaurant when I pulled up. You saw someone running toward my daughter and didn't think to stop them?
My father glared.
You're her bodyguard, are you not?
No, wait. She knew Enzo. A shiver ran down my spine. I remember now. A woman called him by name right before. Leo zoomed in on the woman's face and scratched his jaw.
Would you mind if I took your phone to the waiting room to show my family? If she's a friend or employee, one of them may recognize her.
I'd known him too long to miss the lie. He knew something. He either recognized the woman or the man, or something else in the video. A mob hit? Another one? Just when we thought the Cosa Nostra was behind us?
There's no need to traumatize Shauna. Wait until tomorrow. The police will enlarge it and clean it up.
My father reached for his cell. No, show them now. I handed the phone to Leo. I want this over once and for all. Leo's eyes widened a fraction as if he caught my true meaning. I wanted to know if this was related in any way, shape, or form to his family's former business enterprise. My dad sighed.
I'll need to come with you to enter the security codes. The phone has classified information.
Leo met my gaze.
Will you be okay here for a few minutes? Stuart will stay with you.
Of course. I waited until they'd left the room before turning to Stuart. Who is she? He shifted his weight from one foot to the other.
The picture is fuzzy in those glasses.
Who do you think she is?
Francesca Abruzzo. She goes by Frankie.
I'd never heard of Francesca or Frankie specifically. However, I definitely knew of the Abruzzos. Like the Marchionnis, they were one of the 5 ruling families of the Cosa Nostra, a rival ruling family. Sophia Abruzzo had admitted she'd tried to strong-arm one of Enzo's waitresses into poisoning the soup at Gabe and Maggie's rehearsal dinner. Just as troubling, Sophia was the prime suspect in the hit that had ended Joe and Rebecca's lives. What would the Abruzzos want with Harrison's ex? Better question, what do they want with me?
Chapter 30. Leo. I had a problem. A big one. I mean, huge. Gabe glanced at the woman's image, to the governor, and back to me. He shook his head, but not before I caught recognition in his eyes. Marco took the phone, frowned, and showed it to his wife. Nico pressed her lips together, shook her head, and handed it to Dante. My youngest brother stared entirely too long. His olive complexion went pale, then red, then a sickly shade of green. He also glanced at Dahlia Calhoun before muttering, I don't know her. He fucking knew her. I'd bet my right testicle he knew her very well. I caught him hanging around the 6th floor of the Marchionni Corporation several times. Specifically, I caught him hanging around a cubicle decorated with Star Wars figures and sci-fi posters, and a certain glasses and contacts at the same time wearing woman. What the hell does Julia Carpenter have to do with the shooting? Wrong place, wrong time? I highly fucking doubt it. My mother glanced at the screen inside. "This woman shot my son?" She might have played it cool, but she didn't fool me. Like the others, she'd likely seen Julia at the office or a work function. Hell, my family had made a point of hosting employee parties several times a year to keep up morale. The latest had happened the Friday night before Rocco's first birthday party. Although I didn't recall seeing Miss Carpenter in attendance. "We don't know yet, Ma. Maybe nothing." I took the cell from her and handed it back to the governor. "Thank you. It was worth a try."
Let's hope the police have better luck.
He glanced at the others in the room, and I held my breath. Waylon Calhoun hadn't got to where he was by being dumb. In fact, he was one of the shrewdest politicians and businessmen I'd ever met. Sliding the phone into his pocket, he walked to where his grandson was playing with a couple of matchbox cars. He reached down and brushed Gunner's dark curls from his forehead before placing a kiss on his temple.
"I'll see you soon, Squirt."
"See you, Granddaddy."
Gunner turned and wrapped his arms around the governor's legs. Calhoun knelt in front of the child.
"Your mama isn't feeling well. You're going to have to be extra good for her, you hear?"
Nodding, Gunner put his hands on his chest with his elbows sticking out like wings.
"I good. Right, Daddy?"
Hearing the boy call me Daddy brought a smile to the governor's face. That or Gunner's chicken impression, hard to say.
"There's no mistaking he's yours."
My mother muttered under her breath in Italian, but for once in her life she kept her opinions to herself. "You should know, I plan to seek legal paternity." I don't know why I said it. After everything that had happened, the timing seemed insensitive, almost cruel, but I couldn't bring myself to give a damn.
"And Dahlia? Do you plan to marry her?"
His tone surprised me. In the past, that sort of question would have been asked with a mocking tone. However, he seemed genuinely interested in my response. "As soon as I can convince her to say yes." My family whispered behind me, but like Gunner, they'd never mastered the art of speaking in hushed tones. They knew how to shout, speak loudly, or mutter, but not whisper.
"I'd wish you good luck, but I doubt you'll need it."
The governor clamped a hand on my shoulder.
"Can I talk to you alone for a moment?"
"Sure." I followed him down the hall. He turned and cut to the chase.
"I don't know who that gal in the video is, but you all certainly do. Does this have something to do with the goings-on in Sicily?"
"No, we haven't been a part of that in over a year." He gave me a less than patient smile.
"You may not be, but by all reports, Marco is."
The woman in the video is an employee at Marchionni Corp. I had a split second to make a decision on how much to share. With the exception of Marco, we were legitimate businessmen. As far as I was concerned, I had nothing to hide. I asked her to look into Merriweather after the break-in. She dug up a considerable amount of dirt. His expression darkened.
"You're telling me she knew about Harry's ex-wife?"
"And the others, yes. I never would have pegged nerdy Julia Carpenter as a corporate spy. But I don't think she's the shooter. It doesn't add up."
"How so?"
Yes, she knew we were looking into Harrison and was at the scene, but why was she calling Enzo's name? It's like she knew he and Dahlia were in danger and was trying to help them.
"Maybe. Or maybe she's got you all fooled. Either way, I suggest you have a long chat with Miss Carpenter, preferably before Norland's finest get a hold of her."
He nodded in the direction of Dahlia's room.
"I'm going to say goodnight to my daughter. Until we know what the hell is going on, try to convince her to come to Baton Rouge."
"I will. And thank you for understanding about Gunner."
"Contrary to what you may think, my daughter and grandson's happiness is and has always been my priority."
He glanced away as if distracted by an errant thought. When he turned his attention back to me, he seemed shaken.
"Marriage is sacred, son, and can last a hell of a long time. It should never be entered into for any reason other than love."
Watching Governor Waylon Calhoun walk away, I had the sense that I'd met the man behind the shiny political curtain for the first time. My heart broke for Dahlia. For the little girl she'd once been and the woman she'd become. The Marchionnis might have been loud and borderline batshit crazy, but we loved each other fiercely. I made my way back into the waiting room, and all eyes turned to me, except Dante. He sat beside Gunnar with his elbows on his knees, staring at the floor. The hell? What did I miss? Is Enzo out of surgery? Shauna shook her head. Not yet. Leo, about the woman in the video. I didn't have time for this. I needed to come up with a plan and get back to Dahlia. I thought it was Julia Carpenter, but I wasn't sure. Why didn't anyone confirm it outright? Nico took a page from my mother's book and muttered something or another in Italian. Gabe folded his arms. She may be going by the name Julia Carpenter, but that's Francesca Abruzzo. The air left my lungs as if he'd sucker punched me. No, that's ridiculous. How is it no one recognized her? Have I ever met Francesca Abruzzo? Growing up, I'd heard the name, but she was a good 10 years younger than me. Even if I would have run across her, I doubted I would have paid any attention to a little girl. Sophia, Francesca's sister, was an entirely different matter. Frankie was sent to boarding school in Connecticut when she was 14. Nico sighed as if she carried the weight of the world on her shoulders. She's my cousin, but I barely know her. Is she like Sophia? A murderous, power-hungry sociopath? No. This from Dante, who hadn't bothered to lift his head. My mother added, Frankie was sheltered from the life. As far as I know, she hasn't been back to Sicily since she was a girl. That's not good enough. I need to know what the hell she's up to. She lied to us to get the job. Is it that far of a stretch she's following in her big sister's footsteps? I met Marco's gaze. You're the capo, make the call. Find her and bring her to the house. You worry about Dahlia and your son, and let me worry about the business. He smirked. He fucking smirked? The bastard. This is my business if she shot Dahlia and Enzo. Mommy got a shot? Gunnar glanced around, likely having no idea how he'd gone from joking with his grandfather to sitting in a room full of angry people. My mother gave us a hard look before turning to the boy. The doctors are taking good care of her. She got a shot? His voice quivered. I don't think so, but we'll ask her when she's all done. I want Mama. He looked at me and let out a cry that would have made banshees jealous. Glaring at Marco, I crossed the room and picked him up. No! He kicked and struggled to break free. Nonny, hold me. My mother, God love her, was on her feet and taking the frightened child from my arms in the blink of an eye. Murmuring sweet words to him in Italian, she pressed his head to her shoulder. This isn't over. I pointed at Marco. If you won't track Frankie down, I will. Don't step on my toes, big brother. I'm not going to warn you again. Basta. Stop it. You're upsetting the baby. Ma hissed, rocked Gunnar, and gave me and Marco the evil eye. Shio! I hadn't been shooed by my mother since I was a teenager. Quite frankly, it pissed me off. I turned all of my frustration, fear, and anger on my brother. You heard her. Let's go outside. Marco squared his shoulders, marched past me, and didn't stop until he reached the exit. I freaking hated following him like a dog. He might have been a capo in Sicily, but that didn't mean shit in the States. What are you going to do about Julia or Frankie or whatever the fuck she's calling herself? Marco drew a breath and exhaled slowly, like he thought he was in yoga class instead of an ambulance bay. First off, keep your voice down, or we'll be swarmed with reporters. Second, I am not going to do anything until I figure out what the hell is going on with Dante. Why? I'd expected him to say something about speaking to the other ruling families or following some bullshit protocol. He has a crush on her, so what? Dante doesn't do crushes. He falls hard. Marco glanced away. If he cares about her half as much as I think he does, it will crush him if she's responsible for the shooting. Enzo's on an operating table, but you're siding with the one with a broken heart? I couldn't believe him. This was the kind of leadership the family had in Sicily? No, I'm choosing to proceed with caution. He glared. As I said before, Dahlia's father complicates matters. Plus, there are rules about how we treat women. If Frankie had something to do with the shooting, she should be treated no different than a man. Even as I said the words, I couldn't imagine that the mousy young woman had pulled the trigger or hired the person who had. Look, We need to talk to her. At very least, we need to revoke her security privileges at the office. I intend to have a nice, long chat with her when the time is right." He folded his arms. "I would have already disabled her access to Marchionni Corp's networks, but I've been arguing with you." Biting back a smart-assed comment, I stared at the darkening sky. "Right now, we need to focus on Enzo and Dahlia. Come on, we should get back inside before the reporters see us." He strode back into the building. Once again, I followed him. What good will it do if they're murdered the second they walk out of here? While I doubted Enzo was the target, I couldn't rule it out. Not until I got some answers from Frankie Abruzzo. And there was Harrison Merriweather's ex-wife. Politician Kendall had to be involved in this. But how? Last but certainly not least, Dahlia had a psycho stalker out there somewhere, a stalker I suspect is Merriweather. It has to be related. I caught up to him at the door. "If you won't help me, I'll find someone who will." Marco narrowed his eyes. "Is that a threat? Nico isn't the only one with family ties to the Abruzzos. Giancarlo Lazio and I had a nice chat at your wedding. You go behind my back to another family, and you're one step closer to getting sucked back into the life. Don't think for a second Giancarlo won't use your relationship with a presidential candidate's daughter to his advantage." Because my fucking day could only get worse, Dahlia cleared her throat behind us. She wore a pair of scrubs and a frown. "Have you lost your mind?"
Chapter 31. Dahlia. I thought getting shot was the low point of my day, but I was wrong. Maybe dead wrong. The man I loved threatening to go to a rival mafia capo for help made getting grazed by a bullet seem like no big deal. Add in the part where said rival mob family would likely use mine and Leo's relationship to get to my father, and I had myself a Category 5 shitstorm. Leo glanced from Stewart to Gunner holding the bodyguard's hand and finally to me.
You were discharged? Where's your father?
No, I decided to take a stroll while waiting for the paperwork. I planted my hands on my hips. Dad left once the nurses came in with the paperwork. Now, answer me. Is this what you're going to do every time things get tough? Turn to the flippin' mob? Marco held up his hands and took a step toward the waiting room.
I should go see if there's any news on Enzo.
The doctors came in a few minutes ago. He's in recovery and doing well. Sean is with him. I turned my attention back to Leo. You're honestly considering going to Giancarlo for help? You promised me you'd never do such a thing. Except in self-defense or to protect me and Gunner. But that wasn't the point. He winced.
We'll talk about this at home.
I'm not going anywhere with you until you answer my question. Leo hung his head. Stewart watched Marco go with such longing I felt bad for the guy. Take Gunner back to Evelyn. I'll be right in. Leo leaned closer and lowered his voice.
There's something I need to tell you.
I know. Francesca Abruzzo had something to do with the shooting.
Yes, but there's more.
He pressed his lips into a thin line.
She's been working at Marchionni Corp for months under the name Julia Carpenter.
Carpenter? Isn't that the woman you had investigating Harry? Spots danced before my eyes and my head suddenly felt heavy. I took a step back to keep my balance. Leo grabbed my shoulders to steady me and my stitches pulled. I cried out before I could stop myself.
Dahlia, let me take you home. I swear I'll answer all of your questions after you're settled in.
Sitting and catching my breath would have been the wise choice, but I wanted to get the hell out of the hospital. You have to promise me you won't go to the mob for help or justice or... I lost my thoughts as quickly as they'd come. Just promise me.
I'll follow Marco's lead, but I can't let this go.
He waited until I looked him in the eye.
You won't be safe until the person who did this is caught.
Maybe not even then. I couldn't decide if it was the pain meds, the stress, or an oncoming migraine making me feel so off kilter. Whatever it was, it had very bad timing. I don't like that Marco's involved, but it seems like he's looking out for you.
He is, and I owe him an apology.
Frowning, Leo shook his head.
But right now, I need to get you and Gunnar home.
It took a solid half hour for Leo to pry Gunnar away from his new grandmother. Surprisingly enough, Evelyn had no nasty comments or dirty looks for either of us. Then again, between Enzo getting shot and meeting her grandson for the first time, she had more important things on her mind. She's not going to let us off the hook for long. Stewart escorted us to the main entrance where Leo had left his car. The tension rolling off of the bodyguard made me nervous. It made sense that he'd be extra vigilant considering what had happened to me and Enzo was on his watch, but I worried he'd stroke out if he didn't relax.
Thank Christ.
Leo blew out a breath and tightened his grip on Gunnar.
The car's still there. So are the reporters, but there are less of them now.
Stewart frowned.
Give me 5 minutes to clear them out.
No, it's okay. I tried to smile, but I was sure it had come out more like a scowl. I'd rather plow through them than wait. Leo nodded and slung his arm around my shoulder.
Stay close.
My mind immediately went back to Enzo saying the same thing to me earlier in the night, right before we'd both ended up bleeding in the back seat of the SUV. No, I'm okay. You need to focus on getting Gunnar in the car. Stewart went out first and used his size to shield us from the cameras. When we reached the car, he jerked the passenger's side door open and stood guard as I eased myself into the seat. Leo hurried to the other side and deposited Gunnar into his car seat. The boy wanted no part of the straps and buckles and fought him every step of the way.
Come on, little man. Cooperate.
I want your phone! The volume and pitch of his voice drilled straight through my temple. Camera flashes left me half blind and fighting nausea. Give it to him so we can leave, I pleaded.
Be careful with it.
A split second later, a clattering noise sounded from outside the car. I couldn't turn to see, but I had a sinking feeling Gunnar had chucked the cell out the door. Gunnar Joseph, that was not okay. The boy grunted. Oh yeah, he needs a timeout. Leo bent to pick up the phone.
Fuck.
Did he break it?
Don't move and don't react.
Leo reached in and calmly began to unlock the safety harness on the car seat.
We need to get away from the car.
I couldn't get the air into my lungs to ask what he'd seen, but my brain had no trouble filling in the gaps. The shooter? A bomb? The specifics didn't matter. We were in danger.
I'm going to pull him out. When I say so, go inside. Make it look like we are arguing. Yell, scream, call me names. Meet me back at the waiting room.
Leo's cold as steel voice surprised me. Anger I could handle. The edgy calmness freaked me out. Not to mention, the two people I loved the most were in the car and something was wrong. Seriously wrong.
Gunnar, me and Mommy are going to play fight. We aren't really mad at each other. It's a game. Do you want to play?
Play fight? He sounded unsure.
Yep. You get to scream as loud as you can until we're inside, okay?
Okay, Daddy. The toddler didn't wait for the signal to start wailing.
Now, doll.
I flung the door open and I did as I was told. You son of a bitch! How could you? Behind me, Leo shouted his response, but I couldn't make out what he'd said over Gunnar, the reporters, and my pulse pounding behind my eardrums. I hit the glass doors and resisted the urge to turn and see what the heck was going on. Stewart followed close behind me.
Where are you going? What happened out there?
I think Leo saw something under the car. I kept walking. As long as I could hear Gunner's fake screams, I knew they were all right. We're meeting in the family waiting room.
No, I have a better idea.
He pulled out his phone and dialed.
Hey, change of plans. Meet us with the truck outside the ambulance bay. Love you too.
The bodyguard's voice softened, reminding me he wasn't just an employee. He had more to lose than a job. He had a family. I take it that was Beth? My side hurt like hell, but I had to keep moving. Not only for my safety, for Gunner and Leo, for Stuart and Beth, for their kids. What had happened to Enzo would haunt me for the rest of my life. I didn't want any more collateral damage.
Yes. I don't usually bring her along, but the police confiscated my SUV. I needed a ride.
He dialed again. I started to ask why they'd held his vehicle, but then I remembered Enzo pulling me inside, and the blood. So much blood. Gunner's cries came to me in stereo, half from behind and half from the receiver as Stuart relayed the new plan to Leo.
Dahlia, I've been looking all over for you.
Robert Becker called from down the hall. Shit. His presence surprised me. I was pretty loopy from the pain meds, but I didn't recall my father mentioning Robert was with him. Is my dad still here? I thought he left a while ago. Clamping a hand on my shoulder, Stuart whispered.
Who is that?
Robert Becker. He works for my father. The bodyguard repeated the name to Leo.
We need to keep moving. Waylon went back to Baton Rouge, but he asked me to stick around and make sure you were all right.
He smiled and held out his arms as if greeting a long-lost friend. I didn't have it in me to worry about my manners or playing nice with Robert for my dad's sake. There was no way in hell I was getting close enough to hug him. As you can see, I'm fine. We're on our way home now.
Who's this?
He motioned to Stuart with the flip phone in his hand. Robert Becker had been a permanent fixture in my house since I was a child. While I didn't know much about his personal life, or if he even had one, I knew beyond a shadow of a doubt he was an iPhone snob. I'd watched enough action movies with Leo to know that not all car bombs went off when the victim started the engine. Some were remotely detonated with things like cell phones. My bodyguard! My voice came out higher than normal. I needed to get a grip and get the hell out of there before Leo and Gunner caught up to us. I changed my tactics and flashed him my brightest smile. It was nice of you to wait around, but we really do need to get home. Stuart took a step to the side and opened his jacket enough to reveal his gun.
Good night, Dahlia. I hope to see you and Gunner soon.
Robert grinned.
Bring Leo next time you visit.
I will. Drive safe. I fought to keep my expression neutral. Robert stepped around us at the same time I dipped my chin. His shoes. He wore brownish-orange Italian loafers. Blood whooshed behind my eardrums and I struggled to force air into my lungs.
Are you okay?
Stuart rested his hand on the small of my back. No. I worked hard to keep my voice down for fear of drawing Robert's attention. His shoes. I saw them on the sidewalk.
Where?
I'd never had a panic attack, but I was definitely on the verge of one. He's the shooter. Tell Leo. Tell him to hide. Stuart put his phone to his ear.
Did you hear that?
I grabbed the cell. Leo?
Yeah, babe. It's me. It's okay. Gunner and I had to take a detour to the bathroom.
He had a flip phone. Robert is an iPhone junkie. Leo, he had a flip phone. He sucked in a breath.
Stay close to Stuart and stick to the plan. Gunner and I will be right behind you.
I love you.
I love you too. Act casual. Nothing's wrong. Go with Stuart. I'll see you soon. I promise.
Each step was more difficult than the last. Every person who passed or shadow or sound sent my heart racing faster. But by some miracle, we reached the emergency department without any additional problems. Stewart and I climbed into the truck, and a few seconds later, Leo and Gunnar joined us.
Where to?
Beth glanced in her rear view before pulling away from the building.
The Marchionni mansion. Keep an eye out for anyone following.
Leo buckled Gunnar into the lap belt between us.
Are you okay?
I am now. He squeezed my thigh.
I need to make a call. Is there anything else Marco needs to know?
I shook my head. Given the situation, calling Marco seemed like the right thing to do. The police were a no-go. Robert and the chief were golfing buddies. We were in so far over our heads, I doubted we could find our way to the surface without help, even if it was mob help.
Mama, you sick?
Gunnar rubbed his eyes. I have a boo-boo, but I feel better now. He cocked his head.
I see it?
Not now, okay?
I peed in the potty.
He flashed me a proud smile. Good job. I hugged him tight until he protested and pushed my arm away. And then I hugged him again.
Marco, listen. Dahlia ID'd the perp.
Leo spoke into the phone.
Robert Becker. He works for the governor.
I leaned forward to whisper to Beth. Thank you for your help.
No problem.
She handed me a square white envelope with my name written on the front.
I found that taped to the glass door when I went to the condo to walk the dogs. Where are they?
With their former owner. I stared at the familiar handwriting, trying my best to hold back tears. Why now? Why today of all days? Didn't I have enough to deal with without worrying about this jackass? I tore the envelope open and glanced inside without taking out the note. Blood. He wrote it in blood. My vision blurred to the point I couldn't read the words, but I'd seen enough.
Ordered dozens of the lavender roses you like so much. Next time, I won't miss.
Turning my head toward the window, I fought to keep my breathing even. Is Robert responsible for this too?
You okay, Mama?
Gunnar patted my arm. Yep.
There's a...
Leo glanced at the child and frowned.
Someone put a device in my rear driver's side wheel well. Dahlia and I are headed to Maz for the night. Maybe longer.
Device or bomb?
Not sure. Could be a tracker.
Leo reached across Gunnar and took the envelope from me. Any other time, I would have snatched it back, but I was glad to be rid of it.
We're with Stewart. Any chance you can send more guys?
He scanned the note, his frown deepening more with each passing second.
I realize this is a bad time, but could you let Shauna know Dahlia received another letter from the... Actually, you're going to want to see this one. I'll send a pic.
He stilled and nodded, listening to Marco. I turned to Leo. It's Robert. It all makes sense now. This time, when he reached for me, he took my hand and squeezed it.
Dahlia thinks Becker is the one who's been sending the notes. Until we know for sure, we shouldn't rule anything out, including a second guy.
I nodded my agreement. We'd convinced ourselves that Harrison was the stalker, but it wouldn't surprise me to learn he and Robert were working together.
Thanks, bro. I appreciate it.
He disconnected.
Thanks, bro.
Gunnar screwed up his face.
Who's bro?
Chapter 32. Leo. I spent the majority of the drive to the Garden District answering rapid-fire questions in kid-friendly code. Yes, I'm sure there was something in the wheel well. No, I'm not sure if it was a BOMB or tracking device. Yes, someone will call the POLICE. Yes, I am 100% sure the poodles are safe. No, you can't live at Nani's house forever. Once we'd arrived, Dahlia and Stewart took Gunnar into the kitchen for a snack, and Beth continued the Q&A session. However, the subject matter turned more personal. She followed me around the first floor as I set the alarm and checked the windows and doors. Are you going to establish legal paternity? Yes. What about her father? I thought the two of you didn't get along. Waylon Calhoun and I have a tentative peace agreement. I exaggerated a sigh. I need to make sure Dahlia's okay. Right, sorry. Nodding, she tagged along behind me. And you're absolutely sure this Artie fellow is taking care of the poodles? Yes. I met Stewart's gaze, motioned toward his wife, and mouthed, Help me. He frowned. Beth, come with me while I brief the on-site security team. She sucked in a breath as if planning to ask more questions, but let it go and followed him outside. Watching Gunnar work his way through a bowl of my mother's tortellini calmed me in a way not even a bottle of wine and a good book could. Once I managed to stop my mind from spinning, I was able to replay the events of the day with less emotion and more logic. Dahlia placed a plate of pasta on the table. I thought you might be hungry. I am, but I should be the one taking care of you. I motioned for her to sit. It's no big deal. All I did was toss it in the microwave. She sank into the chair. This place is like a fortress. We're safe here, right? It is, and yes, especially with half of Marco's team in the guest house. I grabbed a couple of water bottles from the fridge and joined her. Tell me about the shoes. Dahlia explained the mystery of the brownish-orange loafers in terms that wouldn't alarm Gunnar. That an expensive pair of shoes had blown Robert's cover struck me as funny. Criminals, even the seasoned ones, made mistakes, but I'd never heard of someone getting popped because of their choice in footwear. We should have a sit-down with your father tomorrow. I hated to bring it up, but the governor needed to know what was going on. More so, we needed his help. Her hand flew to her throat. I didn't think about Dad. He could be in danger. I should call and warn him. Gunnar glanced between us and stuffed another forkful of pasta into his mouth. It'll be better if we do this in person. I took her hand. My guess is Robert's doing this to protect your dad. He won't hurt him unless he's confronted. Her lower lip trembled. How would killing me help my dad? I wanted to kick myself for being an insensitive prick. First off, the guy is a nut job. Nothing he does is going to make sense to sane people, okay? Nut job! Gunnar repeated the word over and over, nodding each time. Dahlia smiled at the toddler before glancing at me. Go on. He's determined to split us up. There's more than one way to do that. Seems he's chosen the permanent method. But if Robert is angry about missing his shot at me and goes back to Baton Rouge tonight... Her voice cracked. Aren't my parents in danger? She had a point. We will call as soon as we get the little man to bed. My phone buzzed, and I had never been so thankful to hear from Marco in my life. Any news? It was an explosive. His voice came across clipped. Remote detonation. You're damn lucky Becker didn't trigger it the second you opened the door. I don't feel lucky. I stood and walked to the far side of the kitchen. How's Enzo? Marco sighed. He's being moved to a private room. The chief of police was here and spoke to Shauna. Enzo will have taxpayer-funded security around the clock. Why? We know he wasn't the target. As soon as I'd asked, I knew the answer. You're keeping up appearances because of Becker's relationship with the chief of police. Exactly. Plus, Enzo could remember something. Becker may decide to tie up loose strings. I hadn't thought of that. Is he safe? I have two of my best guys on him. One inside the room and one outside the door. Marco chuckled. Enzo is the best guarded chef in the world. Have you had a chance to look at the note from the stalker? That's some seriously sick shit, he sighed. I showed Shauna the pic. She said to tell you she hasn't been able to find any information on the private investigator Calhoun ordered to look into it. What do you mean? Is she looking for dirt on the guy? She would if she could find him. She doesn't think he exists. Looks like Dahlia was right about Becker. He couldn't hire a PI to investigate crimes he was committing. If I ever got my hands on the guy, I'd make him understand the meaning of the word pain. Marco lowered his voice. How well do you know Calhoun? Could he and Becker have cooked up the stalker scheme to keep her in line, but Becker took it too far? Until recently, I would have not only said yes, but hell yes, especially if it meant winning the election. However, now that I'd interacted with the governor, I couldn't imagine him terrorizing his daughter. Calhoun, no, but I wouldn't put it past Harrison Merriweather to be working with Becker. Possibly, but we need proof. As it stands now, the dead ex-wife is the only connection. He sighed. Everything okay at Ma's? So far, so good. Enjoy the peace and quiet while you can. We'll be heading back there soon. Great. Dahlia and Gunnar are exhausted. I plan to have both of them tucked in before then. Any word on Frankie Abruzzo? Nothing yet, but Dante is looking for her. He went quiet. Any chance she's involved with Becker? I doubt it, but at this point, nothing would surprise me. Get some sleep. Roger that. Love you, bro. Marco disconnected the call before I could respond. The events of the day had shaken me to my core. Not once, but twice, Becker had made an attempt on Dahlia's life. But I couldn't figure out why he would kill Merriweather's ex-wife, unless he planned to pin Dahlia's death on the senator. I'm missing something. The stalker's tactics were too personal, almost intimate. Sure, Robert could have a thing for Dahlia, but that didn't feel right. Maybe he'd studied stalking for dummies to make it look real? Too tired for more mental gymnastics, I returned to my family. Dahlia let out a quiet laugh and motioned to the little man. Gunnar had passed out at the table, his face an inch from his bowl. He had one hand wrapped around his sippy cup like a miniature drunk after a long night. Scooping him up, I whispered, "Let's get him upstairs. I'll give him a bath in the morning." "Would you mind if he slept between us tonight? He's liable to freak out if he wakes up in a strange place alone." "I'll put him on the sofa in my old room. He'll be close, but not close enough to kick your side in his sleep." I followed her to the second floor. Good thinking. Dahlia removed the throw pillows and pulled an extra blanket from the closet. That she knew her way around made me smile. We'd spent a lot of time in this room when we were in college. Only back then, I'd slept on the couch. We took turns kissing him goodnight. It felt so natural, so damned right. I needed to know it wouldn't end once they were safe. I met her gaze over the sleeping boy and whispered, "Marry me." "I thought you'd never ask." She cracked a grin. "Yes, I'll marry you as soon as we aren't hiding out from a psychopath." You really botched that one, Marchionni. I wanted to groan, but I didn't want to wake our son. Instead, I hung my head and followed her into the hall. "Let's get this over with." She moved slower than normal, and I caught her wincing now and then. I took her into my arms as gently as possible. "Doll, you need to take it easy. I'll call your dad." "I should be the one to tell him." Her voice cracked. "He's going to be devastated." Which is exactly why it should come from me. I'm not as emotionally involved. If you both break down, so will the communication. I pulled back and met her gaze. Worst case, I'll ask to speak to a security team. Okay, that makes sense. She handed me her phone and followed me into the guest room across the hall. Scrolling through her contacts, I mentally rehearsed what I'd say to the governor. There was no playbook for telling someone their assistant of over 20 years had tried to kill their daughter, twice. Waylon Calhoun answered the phone on the second ring. "Hey, darling, everything okay?" "This is Leo. Dahlia and Gunnar are safe, but we need to talk." A rustling sound came over the phone. "Sure thing, son. Give me a minute to get someplace private." He's not alone. Shit. Could Becker have made it back to Baton Rouge? "Is Robert Becker with you?" "Rob's playing poker tonight with Harrison. Why do you ask?" His voice rose. I hadn't told him anything yet, but he already seemed stressed. "Is there any chance we can get someone from your security team on this call?" "You're worrying me. What's going on?" Rather than pussyfooting around the issue, I said, "We know who shot my brother and Dahlia. You and your wife are in danger." Dahlia sucked in a breath but didn't reach for the phone. "Does this person have a name?" Once again, he all but shouted. "What does Robert have to do with this? Is he in danger too?" "I'd rather share that when security is on the line." "Give me a moment, and I'll call you back." I pulled the phone from my ear and frowned. You were right. He's not going to take this well. Good idea getting his security team involved. She forced a smile. If I didn't know better, I'd say you'd done this sort of thing before. I leaned in and kissed her cheek. Maybe once or twice. Exactly 3 minutes later, it rang. A Baton Rouge number without a contact name popped up on the screen. Marchionni. This is Hogan, the head of the governor's security detail. I have the governor on the line. I understand you have information regarding the gunman? Yes. I drew a deep breath and said, Robert Becker. Dahlia recognized his shoes at the hospital this evening. Calhoun barked out an incredulous laugh. His shoes! Orange Italian leather loafers. I understood how ridiculous it sounded, but I needed him to believe me. She didn't see the shooter because her head was down, but she did see his feet and remembered the shoes. You said Rob was at the hospital tonight? His voice thinned, telling me I at least had his attention. Yes, sir. He told Dahlia he arrived with you, but you asked him to stick around until she was discharged. Both men were quiet, except for what I assumed was Calhoun breathing. There was a remote detonating bomb in the wheel well of my car. When Becker approached Dahlia, a bomb! He made a strangled sound. That sounds more like something your kind would use. Dahlia cringed, likely hearing her father's reaction. Ignoring the jab, I opened my mouth to explain, but he interrupted. Were the police called? His shout ended in a choked sob. No, you're wrong. Robert doesn't know anything about bombs. Sir, I understand you're upset, but Upset? You haven't begun to see me upset. His voice became muffled as if he spoke to someone else in the room. A split second later, the sound of a female crying filled the background. Why am I just hearing about this? Calhoun demanded. The female said something. Hang on, son, I'm putting you on speakerphone. Elizabeth is with me. Sure. I stared at the ceiling as if I'd find words of wisdom written above. Calhoun was hard enough to deal with. Add in Dahlia's mother, and I'd need a small miracle. Hi, Leo. Are you sure Dahl and Gunner are okay? She asked between breaths. Yes, ma'am. She's here with me. The governor cleared his throat. Were the authorities notified about this so-called bomb? Yes. My brother called the police after I got your daughter and grandson to safety, but we haven't contacted them about Becker. As I was saying, he was carrying a flip phone when he approached Dahlia. A flip phone? Rob would never be caught dead with a... The words came out in a gush of breath, followed by honest-to-goodness sobbing. Elizabeth said something to him too softly for me to understand, but I got the impression she was trying to calm him down. Wayland's voice grew quieter, as if he'd walked away from the phone. Elizabeth said, Leo, you were right not to call NOLA PD. Rob has friends there. The remainder of the conversation consisted of the governor listening and the head of his security team asking the questions. I relayed the information about the fake PI, the photos outside my glass door, and the letter Dahlia had received earlier in the evening. It was written in blood. I turned to Dahlia, who had tears running down her face. Though I'd lived through some of it with her, hearing the events strung together in a chronological timeline was overwhelming. I couldn't begin to imagine how difficult it was for her to listen to my side of the conversation. I needed to wrap up the call and hold her, if not for her sanity, for my own. I settled for holding her hand. Hogan said, Technically, this case is outside of my jurisdiction, but I'll pass along the information to the FBI. In the meantime, I'll have someone from the lab pick up the letter tonight. A DNA test will confirm the author's identity, but it may be challenging to obtain a sample from Mr. Becker. Dahlia whispered, I want to talk to my dad. I nodded and did my best to wrap up the conversation. I'll text the address. Do you need anything else from me, Hogan? I'm sure the FBI will want to speak to you about the explosive at some point, but I have everything I need to get started. Waylon, Dahlia's here. She'd like to speak to you. He drew an audible breath. I'd like that. Promise me you'll keep them safe, Leo. Promise me. I swear it on my life. I handed the phone to Dahlia. Chapter 33. Leo. My phone rang and scared the ever-loving shit out of me. I walked into the hall to give Dahlia some privacy. Plus, I didn't want to take the chance of the governor overhearing my conversation. Marchionni. This is Artie Guzman. Why aren't you answering the buzzer? I locked myself out and can't get to the poodles. His normally nasally voice rose to a pitch that rivaled nails on a chalkboard. With all of the excitement, I'd forgotten all about him bringing the dogs by. Pinching the bridge of my nose, I said, Because I'm not home. Ha!
he shouted. "I should have known better than to trust you. I left them in the condo while I ran an errand for Mother, and now this!" It took every ounce of willpower not to hang up the phone. "Artie, what are you talking about?" "I know you're home. I see your shadow moving around up there." Shadow? Someone broke in? Robert fucking Becker. "Artie, listen to me." I drew a breath to steady my nerves. "Dahlia and I are at my folks' house. Are you sure someone is in my condo?" "Yes." He stretched the word into 3 syllables. "I'm on my way. Whatever you do, do not go upstairs." I patted my pockets for my keys and remembered my car was at the hospital. "But the babies! Our babies are up there!" he shrieked. "Is it the man with the envelope? The dangerous one? It is, isn't it?" "For the love of all things good and holy. Artie, calm down. I'll be there as soon as I can." I needed to get off the phone and find Stewart. This was our shot to catch Robert in the act. No way could he weasel out of a breaking and entry charge. Once he was in jail, it'd be a hell of a lot easier to get a DNA sample. "Which is it?" Artie demanded. I didn't have time for this. "Which is what? Are you on your way, or will you be here as soon as you can?" "Both." I disconnected and strode back to the guest room. Dahlia's eyes widened. "What's wrong?" "Someone's in the condo. I need to get over there." "No, you can't. Send Stewart or Marco's people. You can't go." She stood too quickly, swayed, and sat back down, hard. I knelt in front of her. "Sweetheart, listen to me. Robert is friends with the chief of police. There's a good chance he'll run once he finds out the authorities are onto him." "I know, but why do you have to go?" "Because I need to make sure he can't hurt you or Gunnar ever again." As soon as the words came out of my mouth, I wanted to pull them back in. "You're going to kill him?" "Maybe. No, I'm going to make sure he's put away for a very long time." She frowned and glanced away. When she looked back, her expression hardened. "I want him dead." Her words hit me like a gut punch. "If it comes down to it, I won't hesitate." "Don't go in alone. Promise me you'll take men with you. All of them. Promise me." "I'll be careful." I wouldn't leave her and Gunnar undefended, but I didn't have time to argue. "I want to see him. Dead or alive, I want to spit in his face." Well, I shared the sentiment. She was the mother of my child, a Madonna who'd grown up in luxury, not some street-smart ball-buster. Then again, that asshole Becker had terrorized her for over a year, tried to blow us all to smithereens, and shot her and Enzo. She has every right to spit on, kick, or flay the guy if she so desires. I'll call you when and if it's safe. Until then, stay here. Marco and the rest of the family should be back soon. Be careful, Leo. It's hard enough to plan a wedding with one person recovering from a gunshot wound, let alone 2. You say the sweetest things. How did I bag such a romantic? Dahlia laughed. I kissed her sweet lips and headed downstairs. It took less than 10 minutes to assemble a team and another 10 to drive to the French Quarter. The plan was simple. 2 of Marco's men would go through the front door, while I and the remaining 3 would cross to the rooftop deck from an adjacent building. From there, we'd split up, with half going in through the sliding glass door in the living room and the rest through the slider in the master. For once, I didn't mind trailing along behind someone else. I'd studied martial arts, was trained in firearms, and could handle myself in bar fights. However, my skill levels were nothing compared to the men who'd accompanied me. They were pros. Once we were on the rooftop of the building to the left of mine, I crouched beside Stewart. See anything? He lowered his binoculars. Becker is in a chair, a few feet in from the front door. Another member of the team relayed the information to the men waiting to enter. After a slight adjustment to the plan, the guy motioned for us to cross the gap between rooftops. I moved forward, preparing to jump. The space between structures was no big deal, but the child-proof railing I'd installed was another matter altogether. I'd need height to clear it. I crouched into a starter's position when someone or something screeched from the building to the right. The shadow of what appeared to be a human windmilling his arms and legs leaped across the expanse, cleared the railing, and rolled onto my deck. I'm man enough to admit I had to clench to keep from shitting myself. What the hell? Stewart hit the ground and pulled me down with him. I'm pretty sure that was the guy I'm co-parenting the poodles with. There are so many things wrong with what you just said that I don't know where to begin. He shook his head.
I moved closer to the edge and used Stewart's binoculars to get a better look. Artie freaking Guzman, what the heck are you doing? He popped up and jumped around, punching the air as if he thought he was Rocky, training for a boxing match. I aimed the binoculars at the sliders and swore under my breath. Robert Becker stood with his hands on his hips, watching the idiot dance around. Artie let out another battle cry and plowed into the door as if he thought it'd shatter. It didn't. He slammed into the glass with a hollow thud that had the entire security team cringing. Like an old cartoon character, Artie Guzman seemed to hang there, flattened against the door before slowly sliding down. The team leader radioed to the men waiting outside the elevator. "He's distracted. Move." Stewart shot to his feet, grabbed the back of my shirt and hauled me upright. I didn't have time to prep or think or look down. 1 second, I was on the neighboring roof. The next, I was flying through the air. I rolled to soften the landing. It didn't work. I'd left a layer or two of elbow skin on the concrete. Artie screamed high and loud. The poodles barked in almost the same pitch and volume. Men shouted from inside and outside my condo. It was pure madness. And then it stopped. "Back off." Robert Becker had his arm around Artie's neck. The taller, thinner man's body wasn't much of a human shield, but the gun Becker had to Artie's head made up for it. Damn it. "Where are you, Marchionni?" Robert looked from one man to the next. Most were at least partially hidden behind my outdoor furniture and plants. I didn't dare move and draw attention to myself. Other than the shadows of a large, potted palm, I had no cover. It would take Becker a millisecond to put a bullet in me. Stewart motioned for me to keep quiet. "Over here. Come and get me, or do you only like scaring women and babies?" His impression of me was close, maybe a little too close. I wondered if he'd practiced. "I wouldn't have had to resort to such a thing if you would have stayed away from Dahlia." He continued to scan the deck for me. I had no doubt he'd kill me given half a chance, but I needed answers. "I don't get it. Blowing me up makes sense, but why Dahlia and Gunner?" Becker laughed. "I didn't want her or the kid dead. Why do you think I didn't trigger the bomb?" Stewart impersonated me again. "But you shot her." "That wasn't me." He glanced from my general vicinity to Stewart's. "Either someone else wants her dead, or she wasn't the target. Although, the sympathy vote would have sewed up the election for Whalen. Maybe I will kill her, once I'm finished with you." His words sent a shiver down my spine. Not the part about killing me. The guy was seriously delusional if he thought he was walking out of here. Was Enzo the target and Dahlia got in the way? He jostled Artie. "Come out, or I'll kill your friend." Artie made a sound somewhere between a wounded cat and a whimper. Eugene let out a bark that sounded more Rottweiler than poodle and launched his furry little body at Becker's leg. Fifi and Cupcake got in on the action, jumping forward, nipping and darting away. The guy cried out, tightened his grip on Artie, and kicked at the dogs. "Drop the weapon," someone called from the other side of the deck. Becker fired a shot, but it went wide, way wide, as in it hit the grill 6 feet away. One of the team members moved behind Becker, but Eugene seemed to think he was a second attacker and chased him back several steps. Seeing such a large man intimidated by a tiny dog would have been a laugh right on YouTube, but under the circumstances, it sucked. At the rate we were going, it would only be a matter of time before Becker shot Artie or kicked one of the poodles over the railing. Artie screeched again, only this time it wasn't in fear, it was more like a distraction. He used his height to his advantage, twisted his torso and went limp. Between the weirdly effective move and the piranha-like attacks from the 3 poodle tears, Becker lost his balance. The guard behind him moved fast and smashed the butt of his gun against Becker's temple. Both men went down. I scrambled to Artie's unmoving form. "Artie, can you hear me?" Guzman opened his eyes and grinned. "You got him?" "See for yourself." I motioned to the bodyguard zip-tying Becker's hands behind his back. Artie sat upright. "That was flippin' awesome! Did you see me? I didn't know if the possum attack would work in real life, but it looked good on the video I saw online." The dogs yipped and jumped all over us. Evidently, they wanted recognition for their part in taking down the bad guy, too. I fell back on my ass and laughed. "You never cease to amaze, Artie Guzman." Stewart walked over and stared down at us, as if we'd lost our minds. "What do you want to do with Becker?" "Dahlia wants a crack at him before I call the police." I stood and hoisted Artie to his feet. "You should get out of here before the cops arrive, but leave the poodles. Why? He narrowed his eyes. I pointed at Becker's bleeding ankles. Those bite marks are going to be hard to explain if there are no dogs here. True. He knelt to pet the pups. I'll bring them to you once the cops leave. I nudged his side. If we're going to be successful co-parents, we're going to have to learn to trust each other. Artie leaned close to the poodles and whispered something about 2 dads and how much we love them. You 2 need serious help. Stuart frowned. Call Dahlia. I'm cutting Marco's guys loose. They shouldn't be here when the authorities arrive. 20 minutes later, Dahlia and Beth walked through the front door. I couldn't say which one was more pissed. Beth glared at Stuart, Dahlia glared at Robert, and I counted myself lucky to not be on the receiving end of either woman's wrath. Dahlia strode to where Robert sat with his wrists and ankles bound. Was it worth it? He smirked. My father loved you, you know. She folded her arms. Maybe he still does, but he'll get over you. It broke his heart when Leo told him you tried to kill me and Gunnar. Robert turned his head toward the wall. You don't get it. I'm pretty sure I do. She crouched to his eye level. You 2 have been together for almost as long as I've been alive. You were the man behind the man, the kingmaker. You needed a way to control me, so you invented the stalker. When that didn't work, you became desperate. How am I doing so far? He glared. What I'm not sure of is which one of you fell in love first, or was it a mutual thing? My brain hiccuped. The governor and Becker were a couple? When did she figure that out? Better yet, how did I miss it? Robert's eyes widened. You knew? Not until recently. Dahlia shook her head. The sad thing is, had you loved him more than his title, the 2 of you could have had a wonderful life together. Think about that while you rot in prison. His mouth fell open. She turned to me. Call the police. I'm done here.
Chapter 34. Dahlia. Hurry up, it's starting! I curled up on the massive couch and turned on the television. We'd arrived at the Marchioni's ancestral home in Sicily 4 days before Christmas. The FBI and the local authorities weren't pleased we left New Orleans. It's not like we were accused of a crime, but it had taken Leo and my father insisting we'd told them everything we knew and threatening to complain to the media before the authorities had backed off.
I'm here.
Leo came in from the heated pool. Between the view of the Mediterranean behind him and the water running over the peaks and valleys of his abs, he looked like a mythical sea god. He leaned in and dripped on me, but I couldn't bring myself to care when he slanted his mouth over mine and kissed me like he hadn't seen me in years.
How are you feeling?
Better now. I traced the hard edge of his jaw. I wish I could swim with you.
Not until the stitches are out. Is the wound healing?
Rather than lifting my shirt from the bottom, he peeked in the top. Evelyn walked into the room.
Leonardo Andrea Marchionni, there will be plenty of time for that after the wedding. Go dry off. You're making a puddle on the tile.
Be right back.
Leah winked and jogged upstairs. Sitting down beside me, Maggie whispered, She'll let up once you're married. I don't think I'll ever feel comfortable touching him in front of his parents. I skimmed through the channels looking for the American news. Gabe seated himself at his wife's feet.
Mags used to say the same thing. Now I can't keep her hands off of me regardless of who's in the room.
I rolled my eyes. I think you have that backward.
I'm serious. She felt me up in church yesterday in front of God and the priest.
Maggie tugged his hair. That's enough out of you. Where are the kids? I'd barely seen the older 3 since we'd arrived. They mostly hung out on the beach with their nanny. Rocco and Ella preferred the swimming pool and playing with Gunnar inside. Napping, thank goodness, Maggie said. Where are your parents? Mom went shopping and Dad will be down soon. I couldn't help but smile. Rather than missing Christmas with me and Gunnar, my mom and Dad had accompanied us to Sicily. Of course, they were all too happy to leave the United States for a couple of weeks to avoid the press. Maggie lowered her voice. It's weird they're getting along so well, all things considered. I think they can remain friends during the divorce because they were never really in love. I had mixed feelings about my parents' weird relationship. Once my father had admitted to his long-term affair with Robert, he and my mother had agreed to share a house as roommates. I didn't get it, but they actually seemed happy with their new arrangement. Gabe turned to me.
Does he miss politics?
Not even a little. I grinned, but he's not happy about moving out of the governor's mansion. Maggie sighed. I still don't understand why he gave up the governorship. Me either, but he seems like a different person now that he's retired. I never would have thought my dad would leave public service, but I supported his decision. Most of all, I was happy to have a relationship with him without Robert Becker in the middle.
Did we miss the press conference?
Marco walked downstairs holding Nico's hand. Not yet. I found the channel, but a toilet paper commercial filled the screen.
Prince Charming!
Gunnar pointed at the TV.
Look, Papa Joe, look!
Leo's father laughed.
I like the bears, but I don't see a prince.
No bears.
He waved his hand at the image of Harrison on the screen. Plopping down beside me, Leo leaned close and whispered.
Is it me, or does Gunnar have a freakishly good memory?
A little of both. I nudged his side. The nurse wheeling Papa Joe into the room arched an eyebrow. She spoke enough English to understand the basics, but Gunnarese had proven too much for her.
Here is good?
Yes, thank you, Rosa.
He patted his lap and Gunnar carefully climbed up like we'd taught him. From the moment they'd met, the two had been inseparable. I'd worried the oxygen tank in the wheelchair would scare him, but Gunnar had taken to the elder Marchionni right away. Likewise, Papa Joe was tickled pink to have another grandson. The man seemed determined to make up for lost time. Enzo made his way to the couch with Shauna hovering like a worried mother hen. That he'd insisted on coming to Sicily for Christmas had surprised everyone. Although Robert had denied shooting Enzo and me, the general consensus was he'd lied. I still harbored guilt over Enzo's injuries, but he'd assured me he'd take another bullet if it meant keeping Shauna's bestie alive. A blonde news anchor spoke into the camera in English with Italian subtitles.
Louisiana State Senator and Governor Calhoun's former campaign manager, Harrison Merriweather, denies any involvement with his former wife's murder.
I hit the mute button. This isn't appropriate for little ears. Evelyn shot to her feet and took Gunnar from Papa Joe's lap.
I saved a cannoli just for you.
Yay! I love nollies.
He clapped his hands, then planted a big, wet kiss on her cheek.
In Italia, we kiss 2 times.
She demonstrated with a loud lip smack on each side.
3 is for good luck.
Gunnar giggled when she kissed his nose.
No, Nina, you silly.
What'd I miss?
Dressed in sweats and a t-shirt, Leo bounded into the room and plopped down on the other side of me. Just the intro. I hit the mute button again. Harrison Merriweather hardly resembled the man I knew. He'd aged 10 years in the previous week. His eyes had lost their sparkle and his suit was ill-fitted and wrinkled.
He looks rough.
Shauna leaned closer to the TV. Marco slung his arm over the back of the couch.
You'd look rough, too, if the world thought you were guilty of murder and felony stalking.
Shh. Leo gave him a mock glare. Harrison looked into the camera.
I had nothing to do with Elle McGuire, my former wife's tragic death, nor was I aware that Robert Becker was harassing Dahlia Calhoun.
Lies.
Shauna tossed a napkin at the television. Thank goodness for Dante, I mumbled half to myself. Leo frowned.
You mean thank goodness for Frankie Abruzzo?
The day after Robert Becker had been arrested, Leo had received a text from his baby brother. It contained a web link, login, and password. At the time, we had no idea what it was for. When Leo entered the information, the link took us directly into Harrison's personal email account. Most of the correspondence between Harry and Robert had been cryptic, but not all. Some of the emails contained the same verbiage I'd received in the letters from my so-called stalker. It still creeped me out that I'd befriended someone capable of writing such awful notes. Leo squeezed my hand.
Are you okay?
I nodded and turned my attention back to the TV. The station split the screen between a live version of Harry's press conference and a photo of Gunnar.
I deeply regret lying about the paternity of Miss Calhoun's son.
Harrison cleared his throat and delivered the message we'd agreed on.
I was deeply angered when Miss Calhoun refused my marriage proposal. I have a long and checkered history of disrespecting women. This is a problem that I am currently seeking treatment to change.
My face heated. That last bit wasn't part of the script. Leo nodded without taking his eyes off the screen.
He's walking a thin line, but he won't cross us. He has too much to lose.
Harry cleared his throat again and loosened his collar.
In an effort to force Miss Calhoun to marry me, I released a statement claiming her son, Gunnar, was mine. This is an impossibility because Miss Calhoun and I were never intimate.
Leo chuckled.
Wait for it. For the past 5 years, I have been unable to achieve an erection.
Harry croaked out the last word. The Marchionni men burst out laughing. Poor Enzo winced, held his side, and laughed again. Meanwhile, the women in the room shook their heads.
I apologize to Dahlia Calhoun and her family for the pain that my lies have caused.
Harrison drew a breath.
I'd also like to congratulate her and Leo Marchionni, Gunnar's true father, on their recent engagement. I wish them all the best.
When Leo and I had confronted Harrison about his part in Robert's plot, he'd begged us not to go to the police. It had taken me 2 days, many conversations with my father, and a careful review of the emails to agree. The correspondence proved Becker had blackmailed Harry into going along with the plan. That, and he'd promised him political favors once my father was elected. My dad came into the room and rested his hand on my shoulder.
How are you holding up?
Okay, I guess. I laced my fingers with his. He dipped his chin and furrowed his brow. I waited for him to say whatever was on his mind, and judging by his expression, was a lot.
Any regrets with how we handled the situation?
He nodded to the images on the TV of Harrison being grilled by reporters. I still have a hard time seeing Harrison Merriweather as a victim.
So do I.
Leo sighed.
Although it was funny, I don't feel as vindicated as I thought I would.
Me either. I rested my head on his chest.
You two getting married, giving Gunnar brothers and sisters, and living happily ever after is the best kind of revenge.
Dad's eyes went misty, but he covered it with a devilish grin.
That is, if you ever set a date.
Evelyn chose that moment to return to the living room.
Speaking of dates, why not have a New Year's Eve wedding? I checked. The church is available in the afternoon.
Ma, stop it.
Leo laughed, but I could tell he liked the idea. However, we had a small problem. Dante was missing in action. He'd gone after Julia Carpenter, a.k.a. Frankie Abruzzo, and hadn't come back. Other than a few cryptic texts to tell us he was alive and to pass on Harry's login info, no one had spoken to him since the day Enzo and I had been shot.
We want our entire families to be there.
Leo tugged me closer.
which is why Marco has people searching for Dante.
Marco's eyes widened.
You rat. That was between us. What, guys?
Gabe glanced between them like a spectator at Wimbledon.
Why didn't either of you tell me?
Enzo got into the mix.
Call off your goons. Dante will be found when he's good and ready.
The conversation grew louder and the hand gestures larger by the second. Leo held his finger to his lips, took my hand, and eased me off the couch. He glanced back at his crazy family and motioned for me to follow him. I would have gone anywhere with him, including straight to the church for a private ceremony. We'd waited forever to finally be together, and I was more than ready to become his wife. Holding my hand, he led me past the pool to the garden. The afternoon sun warmed my face and lightened my mood, or maybe it had something to do with the man holding my hand, or the enormous family inside the mansion, or the fact that, for the first time in over a year, I was at peace. Where are you taking me? I paused to enjoy the view of the bright red bougainvillea covering the side of the cliff. Below us, sunlight shimmered on the crystal blue water. It was truly paradise.
Is this the spot?
He tucked my hair behind my ear. The spot?
Your favorite place in Italy.
He tilted his head and stared into my eyes. A memory fluttered across my consciousness. I'd stood in this exact place too many years before to count. We had been kids at the time, still in college, and more than a little lovesick. Smiling, I held my arms out wide like I had before. This is my favorite place in all of Italy. You have to kiss me here, right this minute, or I will never forgive you. That I'd remembered the words made me laugh. I was such a romantic back then. Leo dropped to one knee and took my hand.
That was impressive. Perhaps you still are?
Maybe a little. My voice cracked. What are you doing?
Proposing. What does it look like I'm doing?
But you already did this and I accepted.
Yes, but it was lame. I want to do it again. Properly.
But, Leo chuckled.
Will you please be quiet? Just for a moment.
I mimed zipping my lips.
Dahlia Elizabeth Calhoun, you've owned my heart since college. It will make me the happiest man who ever walked the face of the earth if you agree to spend the rest of our days together. Marry me, doll.
My stomach did a cartwheel. I already said yes.
Say it again.
He pulled a ring from his pocket. The diamond in the center sparkled like the sunlight on the water, and the rubies surrounding it reminded me of the flowers trailing down the side of the cliff. Yes, I'll marry you. I wanted to throw my arms around him, but the stitches tempered my enthusiasm. Leo slid the ring on my finger, stood, and pulled me into an embrace. Laughing, he kissed a line from my neck across my jaw to my lips. Our families cheered and shouted from the deck above us. Tuning them out, I lost myself in his kiss, the feel of his body against mine, his gentle caresses and demanding tongue. I could have stayed there, kissing him in our favorite spot for the rest of my life.
Mama!
Gunnar broke free of Evelyn and ran toward us, downhill on uneven rocks. Leo released me and met him halfway. Swinging him into the air, he spun in a circle that had my heart leaping to my throat. But they laughed like they didn't have a care. He tossed the boy skyward one more time before catching him and blowing on his tummy. Gunnar squealed. Leo turned to me and his smile wilted.
What?
Unable to catch my breath, I motioned to the cliff and then to Gunnar. He slung his arm around my shoulder and kissed my cheek.
Don't worry,
I'll blow on your belly later.
Since we'd reunited, I'd longed for our relationship to be like it once was, to tear down the wall between us, to have the old Leo back. In that ridiculously high garden overlooking the sea, I realized my wishes had come true while I wasn't paying attention. I rose to tiptoes and whispered into his ear. Too bad we can't do what we did on this spot 10 years ago. A slow grin spread across his face.
Who says we can't?
I loved the devious twinkle in his eyes, but there was no way I was going to risk getting caught naked in the garden. Your mother, for one?
She raised 6 boys. She has to know at least one of us has had sex on every available surface in the house and grounds.
Thanks for that mental picture, but the next time we have sex, it'll be as husband and wife. Gunnar glanced back and forth between us as if he'd understood every word.
Let's do it. Let's get married on New Year's Eve.
The sudden seriousness in his tone surprised me. Wanting to have sex isn't a reason to get married. What about Dante? We'd discussed wedding dates and logistics on the plane from the States. He'd seemed determined to have all of his brothers standing with him at the altar.
Maybe a wedding will bring him out of hiding.
He hitched a shoulder.
If not, we'll force him to watch the video.
I don't have a dress. He gave me an "are you kidding" look.
The second my mother hears we've set a date, she'll be on the phone with every seamstress, florist, and caterer in Sicily.
My heart skipped a beat. Okay, let's do it. Leo poked Gunnar's belly.
Want to tell Nonina we're having a party?
Yes!
His eyes widened.
A birthday?
Better. We're having a wedding.
He chuckled.
With lots of food and cake.
Gunnar pressed his hands to Leo's cheeks and furrowed his brow.
Ice cream?
Loads of ice cream.
Leo led us up the path and set Gunnar safely on the deck. Running toward his grandmother, he shouted,
Nani! Nani!
Evelyn knelt and embraced him.
My goodness, what is it?
A party and ice cream!
She glanced at us with a knowing look before turning back to the boy.
What kind of party?
Gunnar shook his head and used his Batman whisper.
ASEX party.
Leo and his brothers burst out laughing, but I wanted to crawl under a rock. Evelyn stood and pressed her lips into a thin line.
I guess that's one way to look at a wedding reception.
You've been listening to Hot Momosa, a mafia romantic comedy, Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club, Book 4, written by Kathryn M. Hearst, narrated by Ava Lucas and Aaron Shedlock, produced by Bookworm Audio, post-production services provided by Eric Sinestvet, text copyright 2020 by Kathryn M. Hearst, production copyright 2021 by Kathryn M. Hearst, all rights reserved. Be sure and check out Gin and Trouble, Book 5 in the Bourbon Street Bad Boys Club. Thanks for listening.